Even have my. All right. Dead air. Oh. Okay. I think I have the things in the wrong order. All right. I'm good. Thank you. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, November 30, 2022 special City Council regular meeting. If everybody could join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, Carrie.
Mayor Prieden?
I am here.
Council President Conley? Here. Councilor Blum?
Here.
Councilor Letts?
Here.
Councilor Ross?
Present. Everybody's here. May I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It was 5 ayes. Thank you. Visitor communication.
So I have no visitors communication that has been turned in to here. There may be some during some of the public hearings, and
Okay.
we'll call on all of the folks who are on Zoom during the public hearings for that. There was one letter that was put in front of you and also emailed to you late this afternoon, and that will be part of the record, I believe, for text amendment 2022-04.
Okay, thank you. Next up is the consent agenda. I do want to show that there is a cancellation of our December 28th meeting. I just want to highlight that. And we're approving the public right-of-way deed of dedication with the sister school district for the roundabout, which I think is super exciting, but I wanted to highlight that in our consent agenda, and we'll need a motion on that.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I looked around and that was all 5 of us. So next on to council business. We have a long night tonight, possibly, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. The first item on the agenda is a public hearing and consideration of resolution 2022-17. And I'm looking for my stuff. I printed it all out, I promise.
If you don't, I did print it as well.
Dash 04.
It was the other one that had a red line. It had red in it, I know.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, here it is.
There it is. I was gonna say.
I found it.
I see red.
Sorry about that. All right. First up, we'll open the public hearing. And then we'll have a staff report for 22-17.
Sorry, I thought there was one item before me.
No.
Just went really quick, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
this is for the housing plan update.
Yep, that's what I'm here for.
Okay, great. We're here for you.
Good evening, Scott Woodford, Community Development Director for the City of Sisters. Also have with us tonight our consultants on the projects from MIG Consultants, Matt Hasty and Andrew Parrish, I believe, is also with us tonight. So we're excited to be here tonight after culmination of around 9 months of work on these 2 projects. We've been bringing them along at the same time because there's quite a bit of overlap between the different strategies of the efficiency measures and the housing plan update. Even though they're proposed to be adopted as 2 different resolutions tonight, we're going to talk and present them together as one, but there will be 2 motions at the end, hopefully for adoption, but 2 different motions, but 1 presentation. Feel free to ask questions about either project during the presentation. On that note, I just want to make it clear that what we're asking you tonight is not to we're asking you to adopt a resolution, but this isn't a formal land use action. It's not a component of our comprehensive plan. Either of these things are requirements. So we're not going through our usual land use steps. There's not a formal public hearing, that kind of thing. There's no criteria with which to review these things in our development code. They are basically, tools in the toolbox that we can employ to address issues for housing, for affordable housing, to make sure that we take a look at infill opportunities. And this all kind of the background and the reason that we're bringing these things forward, well, at least for the efficiency measures, started with our comprehensive plan update in 2020 and ending in 2021. And a component of the comprehensive plan is your housing needs analysis, which is done to determine what our housing needs are going to be 20 years in the future, so that we can plan properly for that anticipated demand. With we also have our updating our parks master plan and our water and wastewater master plan, and our transportation plan recently. So it's just all planning work to kind of make sure that the city's ahead of the game and being proactive on growth versus reactive, where nobody wants to be. But out of that housing needs analysis came a projection of potential housing units that the community is going to need to meet our anticipated population projections that were put together through Portland State University, and which every community is required to utilize in their planning. And as you all know, I've been experiencing that process. The outcome was that our population is anticipated to potentially double in the next 20 years, and with that, almost a doubling of housing units that we have existing. So the question, once you establish that, is how do you accommodate? How are you going to accommodate that growth? And as we know, our existing city boundary is our urban growth boundary. We don't have any land to expand out into, like a lot of communities in Oregon do for one reason or another. So one option for us, obviously within the state planning rules, is to expand our urban growth boundary, but also, prior to that, the state laws say that you have to consider efficiency measures first before you can apply for something like that. And so efficiency measures are the tools that we can put into place to facilitate more infill within our existing boundaries, utilize the land that we currently have as efficiently as we can, or efficiently as possible, balancing community character and community concerns to a degree as well. To determine how many of those units we can accommodate within our existing boundaries and how many units we're going to have to potentially contemplate with an urban growth boundary amendment. So that's the tie-in to the efficiency measures project. The housing plan update, we have a housing plan currently, but it was last adopted in 2010. Quite a bit's changed since then. Tools and strategies that have come into play that maybe were not considered back then that we're proposing to be contemplated with the housing plan update. And it's basically a tool to create more housing choices for our community, and to both from on the affordable end all the way up to the free market end as well. It's all about what ways we can stimulate more housing choices. And that has a whole host of different strategies. Before I turn it over to Matt for a presentation on kind of more of the detail, just wanted to close by saying that the Planning Commission did review these two plans at their November 17th meeting and unanimously recommended that council approve these documents. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt. He's going to lead you through a presentation that kind of goes into a little more detail about the process that we went through to get here, the public input efforts that we created, as well as some of the details of the strategies and more importantly, maybe how we propose prioritizing some of these things going forward. So I'll take it over, Matt.
All right, thanks, Scott. Thank you all for having me here tonight. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I am going to share my screen and walk through a presentation. I'll go through it, I think, relatively expeditiously, or at least that's going to be my goal. There we go. Let me just get my screen set up. Can you see that? Can you all see that? Is that coming through? Great. Okay, so this is just kind of a reminder on the schedule and the process that we went through. As Scott said, we started work on this early this year. We've had a number of work sessions with the Planning Commission and briefings with you all during this process. I'll talk a little bit more later about some of the other things we've done in terms of engaging other members of the community. And so now we're at the adoption stage. And as Scott said, some of this work is built on previous work as well. The earlier housing plan, the comprehensive plan update, the housing needs analysis. We had worked with y'all to update your housing needs analysis even prior to the comp plan update, and then kind of a minor update as part of that process. So all of this is kind of building on all of that earlier work that we've been going through. So in terms of, what we're talking about tonight, this item is all about the updated housing plan and the efficiency measures report. There'll be a separate public hearing to look at some potential code amendments. There were a number of code amendments that we're not carrying forward at this time, but that the city could look at later, and a number of other strategies that are really kind of intended to be implemented over the long term. So this is just sort of recognizing that there's some potential early stuff for adoption, and then some things for later consideration and implementation. So I'll say a little bit more about that efficiency measures report, build on what Scott had to say about it. As Scott said, if a city is at some point looking at expanding its urban growth boundary, before they do that, they need to look at how to use the land they have in the existing boundary efficiently. The term that's used in the state rules is consider. You don't have to implement everything you consider, but you need to take sort of a good faith look at it, evaluate the impacts, and determine what you do want to implement. So that's really what this process is about. So we've identified as part of this process a variety of different efficiency measures or strategies, worked with you all to prioritize them. Again, some of those are recommended to be implemented and adopted through some amendments to your code. And there's a fair bit of overlap between a number of the efficiency measures and a number of the things that are strategies in the updated housing plan as well, because some of these things both help make efficient use of land, but also help provide more housing choices and options, as Scott talked about a little while ago. And again, I already said, a number of these things are really meant to be looked at over time. And this is a first step. Should you choose to move forward with an urban growth boundary amendment process down the line, this represents the step of considering those efficiency measures. So it doesn't mean you need to go through that process, but it gives you sort of the starting point to do it. So we've got this kind of a long list of efficiency measures we looked at. Some of them, again, we've started to draft we've drafted some code amendments to potentially implement. Others we did not, and are not recommended necessarily for implementation at this time. So the things with the X's are things that we talked to you about, talked to the Planning Commission about, are not necessarily recommending taking forward at this time. So those include increases in height limits outside the multifamily, well, really in increases in height limits, total maximum height anywhere. I'll talk about, we'll later talk about height limit increases or variations, let's say. We're not looking at potential changes to parking, off-street parking requirements. We talked about, but are not looking at allowing mixed-use development in commercial zones. So there's a number of things that we're not talking about sort of pursuing as part of the efficiency measures recommendations. And in some cases, that's because the conversation was the city needs more time to think about some of these things. In other cases, they don't do a lot for you in terms of the intent of the efficiency measures, which is to reduce the potential need for additional land inside your urban growth boundary. So there's a fair number of things that we are recommending and then some things that we're not. So I'll talk a little bit more about the updated housing plan. Scott already mentioned this is an update of your 2010 housing plan. And then I mentioned that it incorporates strategies from the earlier housing needs analysis and the update to that we did as part of this process and also part of the comp plan update process. So we looked at these different types of strategies using a number of different criteria. We evaluated them. We talked to you all and the Planning Commission about them. We went through a process of prioritizing them, and they fall into a number of different categories that I'll talk about in a moment, including some of which are or represent amendments to your development code. And really the intent of this document is to be kind of a long-term roadmap for how, as Scott said, you increase housing choices and options for folks in Sisters. Again, some of them overlap with those efficiency measures, but really in large part, they're about how to achieve some of the housing needs that are identified in your housing needs analysis, and how to expand housing choices and options for folks. You cannot implement all of these things on your own, or a variety of these measures or strategies really require partnerships with other folks in the community. And there's a number of other factors that, staff resources, monetary resources, et cetera, that are going to have an impact on what you can implement and when. So the types of strategies identified in the housing plan update: zoning and code changes. We'll talk more about those later. Some other things just to help reduce kind of barriers or impediments from a regulatory perspective, financial incentives for certain types of development, as well as financial resources for the city to help support or fund some of the strategies we're talking about. And then again, partnerships with other organizations or entities. And part of that can include using publicly owned land to help develop housing. So that's kind of the land acquisition and partnerships piece. One of the things that we did in terms of making some changes or updates to the updated housing plan was to add an action plan element as an appendix to the document. So we'd already identified a set of actions associated with each of the strategies in the document, both short-term and medium to long-term actions. But particularly for the higher priority strategies, we wanted to put that all in one place within the document so it was easier to see. So this is just an excerpt of that action planning piece that's, I think it's Appendix B to the document. I'll say a little bit just about community engagement. So extensive review at the Planning Commission on both of these pieces, as well as briefings with you all. We had a couple of different rounds of stakeholder meetings with housing providers and developers, both affordable or nonprofit providers, as well as market rate, and a number of other stakeholders. Received a lot of written and verbal comments kind of throughout the process that you've seen. We conducted an online survey, and staff conducted an open house on October 6th. So both of those things happened during the fall, and now we're in the hearings process. So as Scott noted, we've gotten a recommendation from the Planning Commission to move forward with this, and now we're here to talk to you. So some of the things that we heard via all those activities, in terms of what we heard from some of the housing providers, or really most of them, was support for a lot of these strategies, including the code amendments we've talked about. Qualified support from the Central Oregon Land Watch. They always, I shouldn't say this always, but they often want to see you do even more. So when I say qualified support, it's along the lines of, this is great and we'd love to see you do even more. Some of the folks we heard from said, you should do all of these things. That's maybe the only way you're going to make a dent in addressing housing needs in Sisters now and moving forward. Other folks said, let's really prioritize housing for longer term residents and people who work in Sisters, particularly those who don't make enough money to be able to afford new housing in Sisters for the most part. And we also heard some concerns about just the pace of growth in Sisters. The community's growing quickly, and will some of these strategies exacerbate that situation? Do we need to accommodate growth? From a statewide planning perspective, yes, that's sort of part of every city's charge, is to address a plan for growth, really. And also we heard people note concerns about infrastructure capacity, road and traffic capacity, and different levels of support for some of the different policies in terms of what we heard in that online survey. I believe you got a copy of the summary of that earlier on in the process. Just a couple other notes about some of the changes we made to these documents kind of in the last couple of months as we talked to you and the Planning Commission about this. One, updated some of the strategies based on feedback from the Planning Commission and Council and other community members. We included a summary of the potential impact of the efficiency measures on land supply and land needs, and that's at the tail end of that report. To the extent this is used down the road as part of a UGB amendment process, some of that would need to probably be updated again, simply because things will continue to change. The supply of different types of land will continue to change. So, but you've got kind of the framework to be able to make those changes moving forward. I noted that we added that action planning element to the housing plan update. We added some more graphics and images to the documents. And then updated the proposed code amendments. And that's been kind of an ongoing process over the last couple of months based on, again, conversations with you all and the Planning Commission and what we've heard from other folks in the community. So those are some recent changes. And just in terms of, what happens down the line, again, these two documents are in front of you for potential approval tonight. I noted that the efficiency measures piece, some of that analysis would need some updating, mostly around the impacts, the potential impacts of those if you were to move forward and use that as part of a UGB amendment process. But again, they give you sort of the basis for doing that. And then again, the housing plan is really intended to be implemented over the long term. There's a number of short-term and medium to long-term actions in that document that talk about how you would go about doing that in partnership with other folks in the community. And we would really recommend that, to the extent you are updating your development code, that you continue to take a look at how that's going. How are those updated changes working for you? I would not, wait 10 years to do that. I would suggest in the next year or two, take a look and see, are you getting what you want out of those things? Are they making a difference? Are they improving housing options and choices? Are they creating some problems that you need to sort of think about rectifying? So I wouldn't consider those things as set in stone. And the same thing with the documents, the housing updated housing plan. I mean, that's something that you really should be revisiting periodically. So these aren't meant to be this kind of set in stone documents, but they're meant to be looked at periodically and updated as conditions change and needs arise. So I think that is the end. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation on those two documents. Happy to answer any questions y'all might have about them.
Okay, we have a process to go through first before we get to questions. Generally this time, don't we get public comment at this time? Is there any public comment on the housing plan or the efficiency measures report?
Matt, can you unshare the screen? I'm not able to do that. Thank you. And I will go for the folks who are here on Zoom. And if I call your name and you'd like to speak, that'll be your opportunity to state your name and where you're from. Clayton Crowhurst.
Yeah, Clayton Crowhurst, Northwest Housing Alternatives, and listening in tonight from Bend.
No comment. Chris Converse.
No comment.
Eric Strobel.
No comment.
John Tehan.
No comment.
Judy Smith. Judy, you're muted. If you could unmute yourself, please.
No comment, thank you.
Sarah McDougall
No comment, thank you.
and Susan Cobb.
No comment, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. A little time consuming on Zoom, but we appreciate you being here. I'm going to, at this point, close the public hearing, and it's time for council discussion and questions, either of Scott or of Matt, right? Okay. Andrea, I'll start with you.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Jennifer?
Can I make a comment?
Sure. That's part of it. Comments and questions.
I don't think I have any questions at this point. I'll just comment that I just want to thank MIG, EPG, the planning staff, the city. I want to thank the planning commission and all the citizens that participated in this process. It was a heavy lift for everybody, so I just want to acknowledge that. And yes, this is to reiterate, which was something I had to kind of read 3 or 4 times myself, was this is just a, you know, a document that we can use for a guide. It is not, it's not harshly prescriptive. We don't have to do anything in there if we don't want to, but it's very nice to have, and I think be a useful tool moving forward, at least for the next few years. And I appreciated Matt's comment that yes, we really need to, as much work as it is, we need to revisit these things every few years because we live in a changing world, and it's good to revisit documents like this. So thank you.
Okay. Gary?
None on the housing plan update itself. I'll save mine for later.
Okay.
Get in the next meeting.
Basically just reiterating what Jennifer said. It gives us options in the future. It was a tedious process and a lot of hours. I would hate to count up how many volunteer hours and comments you all dealt with, but you addressed all of them, and I thank you for that, especially the comments when the Planning Commission and City Council made, you came back with the changes, so I appreciate that.
Right, and Jennifer stole my thunder, but really it's okay because I hope that staff knows and the Planning Commission and all the volunteers that worked on this. Of course, our consultants, although they got paid, so they're okay. No, but honestly, it was a lot of work, and it's been a lot of work, and we've been talking about this a long time. And the most important part is that the state has instructed us to consider these, and that's what we're doing. We're not implementing any of these at this point, although some of them may be implemented quite quickly after, but others may never be considered. But I appreciate you building this roadmap for us on both of these, and especially staff. I know you guys worked hard on this, so thank you very much. I don't have any further questions on this one. Do we need to do a second public hearing anyway and kind of go through the
Yes,
motions?
so we would need a motion for this one, and then you can probably pretty quickly move through the next one. But
Okay.
process. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, Scott, you said you were doing both at the same time. You gave us all the information, but we have to go through 2 public hearings just to stay in line. So if anybody's interested in making a motion for this, we can certainly entertain that.
I move to approve and adopt resolution 2022-17.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is this just a regular vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? I thought none. Okay, good. All right. I'm going to open up a public hearing for 2022-18, a resolution of the City of Sisters City Council acknowledging the Sisters land use efficiency measures. And now we get a staff report, but we've kind of already had the staff report. There's nothing really to add here.
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. We'll have to go through the public comments request again through Zoom. So everybody on Zoom, get ready. Here we come.
Clayton Crowhurst,
No comment.
Chris Converse,
No comment.
Eric Strobel,
No comment.
John T. Hunt,
No comment. No comment.
Sarah McDougall,
No comment.
Susan Cobb,
No comment.
and I will look to the floor. Is there anybody in the room who'd like to comment?
All right, thank you. I'll close this public hearing. Does anybody have any further comments on council about the Sisters Land Use Efficiency Measures Report.
Yeah, I actually have a request. When we look at strategies, strategy 11 and 12, I've been approached by more than one individual in the neighborhoods, and I think we need to move it into the needs more discussion activity. I think that when we did the survey, we didn't specifically ask if people would be concerned if they lived in a strictly residential neighborhood, SFR, single family residential, allowing duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes on a lot within that part of the community. I think that's a change in what we've done in the past. It's a change we don't have to do. It's required of our larger communities in the state. And I'd like to see us do a little bit more public outreach to see what the general opinion is in the community. And I'm talking about a community survey, folks that live within the city limits. So that would mean 11 and 12, as they're both kind of tied together. I would like those to be moved to needs more discussion. With that in mind, I could easily vote to adopt the rest.
Okay, how do we handle that?
Can we bring up the map that shows what zones are now only single family residential that he's talking about excluding from duplexes, whatever? Or can you tell us where it is exactly, or just funnel through?
Most of the overlay maps
So you're talking about the residential zone district,
are, yes,
not allowing triplexes and
As an outright
quadplexes
yeah,
as an outright use.
the language, yep.
And that's in the single family residential zone?
Yes, so it would be, I don't know how it is for master plan villages like Pine Meadow, but Timber Creek, Buck Run, Pine Meadow, Sun Ranch, some of those areas that are all single family residential, not an MFR zone. And so to me, that essentially what we're saying when we do this is we're changing all of our residential zones R to an MFR zone, multifamily residential. That's how I view it anyway.
Okay, yeah, with the exception of multifamily, would 4 units
Yes.
and above,
Yeah, yeah.
or more than 4 units
Define
would
it
not be.
differently. But the point again is that as an outright use is the language that I have trouble with. And I don't think that we've asked that question to the community. When I look at says support is moderate to high in the document, but when I look at the survey, we never asked that in the survey. So Planning Commission thinks it's a good idea, maybe, but that's a small subset of our community. I think we need to ask the residents of the community what they feel about it. And I think that deferring that as we do some of these other strategies doesn't set us back. I think we can move forward, but I really think that before we just open the door and someone comes in and says, well, why is there a triplex going up next door to me? Well, we voted on it. When? Well, in December. I didn't know about that. I mean, I just think we need to be clear and upfront when we make changes to zone areas, as we have been with some of these others, and we've had some letters about this specifically. I just don't think that this one really has risen out with the same amount of, what's the word I want to use, public awareness. But I have had folks that have read it in my neighborhood that have come and said, I don't like that idea at all. So I represent part of the community, and I think I should bring that up. One vote, though.
So I have a question. I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. I'm not against you, but.
I don't know about that. I got something I can throw, though. So.
No. Well, let me shoot it at you. You mentioned
Yeah.
Buck Run.
I don't know the
East
names
County
of all the
Springs.
neighborhoods. Someone asked, so
Yeah.
I just ran the
So-
ones I knew.
I think in
There's
many of those planned neighborhoods, there are HOAs. And, I know that HOAs can change, but I think I'm pretty sure that those HOAs all have their own rules, and most of them wouldn't allow them anyway, correct?
Buck Run doesn't really have any HOAs in place. But see, that's the problem. If you have an HOA or strict CCRs, then your particular little neighborhood's excluded. So I think we need to really go at this with an open mind. I mean, if you're in an older residential area, you may have very light CCRs and an HOA that's been defunct for 20 years. I don't know how long. If you're in a place like Pine Meadows, you have an HOA that tells you when you have to put your garbage cans in and out the door. So, I mean, there's different levels of oversight. And I think that, I don't know enough of the different areas of town and where they were, but when I looked at the overlay maps, they mainly dealt with that downtown core and areas north, a lot of the overlay maps. I think there was only one that showed the residential areas. Yeah.
There's the zoning map right there. And we're talking about all the,
It's real hard to tell on that with the colors, but.
yeah, we're talking about all the areas that are kind of
That area there.
tan, south of downtown.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment about this maybe in terms of kind of how that issue is framed in the efficiency measures report? Or I'm happy to answer questions about that, put it that way. So I know this part of the hearing or the meeting is about adoption or approval of the efficiency measures report, which really is essentially an analytical document. It does talk about that as a potential strategy. It talks about that as in terms of what kind of impact that might have. It has some language about how that's being considered as part of the separate thing we're going to talk about later tonight, the code amendments. And it reflects where we were when we provided the materials for the public hearing. So you're going to have a chance to talk more about that as an actual code amendment later, right? If that does not move forward, I think we would want to update the efficiency measures report accordingly. But right now it just reflects sort of where we are in the process. Adopting it by itself doesn't require you to actually adopt those changes to your code. So I think that was sort of the point Scott made earlier, but the language around it in the report, again, reflects sort of where we are in this process right now and what things are being taken to you and were taken to the Planning Commission as potential code amendments, just to try to be kind of clear about where things were in the process. So I just want to note that. And then I do want to say that in terms of this strategy, this is a strategy that shows up in both documents. And so we've been talking about it in this way for a while. But again, it could be a thing you move forward with, or you could choose not to move forward with it. Either way, it's a strategy that we considered in doing that evaluation for both the efficiency measures report and the housing plan update as part of this process. So I would just kind of note that, and we kind of all along talked about allowing those types of housing potentially in the R zone, not just the MFR zone. So I would just note that it could be that, again, if you don't move forward with that as a code amendment, we want to go back and make sure that's clearly reflected in the report for the efficiency measures study.
My problem is that there's 3 separate documents here. There's 200 plus pages of reading, and trying to cross-reference where these things occur in that document requires an intimate knowledge like of the person who had written it. No offense, Matt. And so this is the most obvious place that I see this. And that's why I'm bringing this objection up now. I'm very uncomfortable approving it here. And then knowing that it might be then allowed in the lower document because I don't see it in the code amendments. And so I think that calling it out now, and we have areas in here that say need more discussion. I don't think that means we can't adopt this. I think it just means we change the wording on that and we adopt it with modifications, just as we do anything else. And that's what it's going to take to get me a yes vote out of me. I'm very serious.
Well, my understanding is that we will address this specifically later in the evening. Yes?
C.
Yes.
Under the text amendments?
Yes, it is under the text amendment, so I think that is where we can have that
Boy, I couldn't
discussion
find it.
because.
It was kind of buried in there.
Well, it is, I know, it was a very confusing packet
Mike-
for sure, but I feel like, I think I'm with Matt on this, is that, this process is just acknowledging that this study was done and then it exists, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty in 5 minutes.
I've been doing this for 13 years in elected positions. I never want to approve a document that says we're going to do something and later another document say that we're not going to do it. These go out in front of people, and I think that if you say it here, that you're going to do it, you can't go down later and say, well, now we're not going to do it. I think that it just makes me very uncomfortable. And that is the degree of my reluctance, it's the uncomfortableness of hoping that whatever we say here gets carried out the way that we hope it gets carried out, as opposed to being clear in what our intentions are in the documents that we put forward in the public record.
Is this a legal and binding document, or is it considerations of like the prior one?
Considerations of.
It's not a legal binding document. It's just in talking with our city attorney, he equated it to a white paper in some respects of research and tools in the toolbox that we could use.
It doesn't say we're going to use them. It says, here's a wide variety that the city looked at and is submitting them for consideration later on. Not that we're going to do them, not that they have to be done.
That's correct. I mean, yeah, it's correct. We did put an action plan in there, so we did some prioritization based on the feedback we got from the Planning Commission and the council. So there is that, but it doesn't ultimately. You don't have to acknowledge the action plan prioritization either, because it's
the prioritization my concern is with.
Okay.
Gary, I have ones that are check marked on this that I don't agree with
Okay.
But
as well.
Yes, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, this is information that we have requested and they've given it to us and they have made recommendations. Then we will decide whether we accept those recommendations or we do not. And there are recommendations checked here that I will not vote for, even though they've been recommended.
Right.
I just see
I think that's
this-
what I'm saying as well.
Yeah, and so I feel comfortable that I can agree that this is what's being recommended based on staff and input and research and whatever. And when we get into voting on the actual text amendments, we will agree or disagree on these recommendations. I don't see this as saying what we will do, it's what they are recommending we do.
And I think what we're saying is based on what you decide with the text amendments, we can circle back with the document and note its prioritization accordingly, that if you all think it's something that needs more study, then I think we can amend the plan to note that it's something that needs more study.
I don't mean to be thick-headed, but if this is where the recommendations are, is right here.
Yeah.
And so we go down to the amendments that is the public file, where we modify or whatever, and then we go back to this. I mean,
Can we do it in
it seems to me it'd be a
a
cart and a
different
horse issue,
order?
and I think
Can we
the
go
cart's
do
running
the
down the
text
road and the horses.
amendments and then based upon what we decide on the text amendments, come back and approve this, bring it back for modifications based on what we've approved in the text amendments? Or is that?
Or we could do it the order that we're proposing and then bring it back for amendments that are at the next available meeting, to note what decision's been made.
Or
on the
let
text.
me come up with a solution for you and see if you like this.
Go for it. I'm always willing to listen.
Are we allowed to change one word
In the document?
in this document right now?
Yeah.
If we change the word outright to conditional, would that be something that you could live
Yep.
with? Because that means there's a condition on it.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean it can't be
The word-
out,
the
it
outright
doesn't mean
word
it
is-
couldn't be outright either if we change the code, or it could be conditional, or we could take it out completely.
I think the idea of conditional then is you go through a planning process and you have to put a land use notice on the property like you do with other things. That gives people an opportunity to.
Well, there's different levels of condition,
Yeah.
obviously. There's different types, and some
Mine
of
is
them
the
are
ultimate condition.
some of them are staff, well, some of them are staff level, some of them are
Yeah.
planning commission. I was just saying if we could get through this document with just using the word conditional instead of outright, and we could all pass it, it still doesn't mean we can't refine it after we do our text
I'd be
amendment.
comfortable voting for that.
Head nod if that's, it's a one-word change. I'll do it.
What?
I think that's fine if that's what you want to do. Just noting that it's coming through as code amendment as a permitted use.
And that's where we will change.
That's where you can kind of have that,
We all
We're
agree.
gonna
have that deliberation.
We're gonna get some pushback, I think, which
Yeah.
is okay.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
what we're here for.
We're not all in lockstep
Right.
on
Okay.
everything, that's
Okay.
for sure.
Matt, did you have any comments on that just before
Matt, what do you think?
I think that's fine. I also think, you could say, yeah, I think that's a fine solution. I think that, again, you could also say, look, for that particular report, if we don't move forward with some of these things as actual proposed, or we don't adopt some of those code amendments, we could change the language around the status of those things in a revised document too. So I think either way is fine, but I think, yeah, it seems like a reasonable solution for now, and then you'll have the discussion around the text amendments.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably not normal, but we do have a sister's way once in a while, and I think this falls in that.
Levels of discomfort, and that
It-
falls
well,
below the level of
I-
discomfort that makes me vote no.
If this is a white paper, that we can still make code changes, make sure we get those right, and then unfortunately, bring this single document back, make a couple of text changes, and do it again.
we can make it a living document?
Thank you.
I
Right,
mean, the other option is that he can vote no.
right.
I mean, you will,
Then you're heard, but
yeah.
What do you think?
disregarded.
I mean, you just,
I think like always, consensus is better than.
I don't have a problem passing it as written. And maybe we do take a vote. So I guess I move to approve and adopt resolution 2022-18
as written.
as written.
Do we have a second on that?
A second.
And we have a motion and a second. Let's take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All
I,
those nay.
No.
Okay, so we're 4-1.
4-1.
It's-
we're forewarned, we know what's
Yeah.
coming.
It's coming.
Mo- Motion passes. Again, I'm not too worried, I'm not worried, Gary, for
I'm
you.
not either.
Okay, good. That's the main thing. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Woke us
um,
up. Yeah,
It's all right, whip up the bass.
Get up in the word.
No, I'm just kidding.
You had a choice on November the 3rd.
Yep.
All right, we're on to C, public hearing consideration of Sisters Development Code text amendments, housing plan and efficiency measures, TA 2204. All right. I have a long script, so get ready. It's 3 pages long. This is the time set for a public hearing on city file number TA 22-04, an application submitted by the City of Sisters for a development code text amendment relating to implementation of the Sisters Housing Plan Update and Land Use Efficiency Measures Report. This meeting is now called to order. A public hearing will be conducted as follows: staff report and counselor questions to staff, entry of additional correspondence received into the record, opening the public hearing for testimony in the following order: proponents of this changes sought, opponents of the changes sought, and neutral testimony. Then we'll have questions of staff, if any, by council. I think there will be some. Then I'll close the public testimony portion of the hearing, and there'll be no further testimony, and then we'll have discussion by council. About testimony. Testimony will be accepted in person or remotely via Zoom. For those wishing to testify in person, please raise your hand and you will be called forward to speak. For those wishing to testify remotely via Zoom, we will conduct a roll call by stating the name listed for individuals. If you would like to speak, please provide your testimony after you are called. If you do not wish to provide testimony, please say no testimony after you are called. Any questions should be directed to me as the hearing chair. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record. Please speak clearly and loudly to ensure testimony is heard, as this hearing is being recorded. At my discretion, I may limit testimony to 3 minutes per person, and I likely will. I would encourage those wishing to speak to keep testimony concise and relevant to the issue before us this evening. It is encouraged to simply agree with a point made by another person instead of remaking the point. For the deliberations tonight, the applicable substantive criteria are listed in the staff report. These are the criteria the council must use in making its recommendation. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards these criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulations that the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Testimony that is not directed towards applicable or potential applicable approval criteria, even if a strong point is ultimately not relevant. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the council to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. At this time, I'll ask if any counselor has any conflicts of interest. If so, please disclose the nature of the conflict and whether the member believes the conflict would preclude the member from objectively participating in these proceedings. I'm going to call you individually. Gary.
I'm sorry. I was busy trying to find what this is in the damn code.
Do you have any conflicts?
Do you have any conflicts of interest?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine.
I thought you asked if I had any conflicts with this. I'm going, well, yeah.
Yeah. Jennifer.
No.
Andrea.
No.
None.
None.
And I apologize to the mayor for not being.
Oh, no, that's okay. I don't have any conflicts either. Does any person in attendance desire to challenge the participation of any member of the council? On Zoom, I'll give everybody a couple of seconds. Okay. Time for a staff report. Please present your report. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. I'll just make a short little intro presentation, intro comments, and then I'll again pass it over to Matt for a presentation on some of the details of the actual code amendments. As you just heard a presentation on our the housing plan update and the efficiency measures. Well, these code amendments are implementation of several of those strategies that are outlined in both of those plans, and they're ones that we've decided to bring forward, and that's based on a kind of a combination of things. It's the ones that we felt had general support amongst the Planning Commission and the Council when we queried both groups during the review process. Some general support from the community, concerns we've heard as well, but there are also some strategies that tend to have the greatest impact in terms of our making a dent in our housing needs in our existing boundaries. I had mentioned that there's a tie-in to our comp plan and our housing needs analysis. Well, these are direct implementation of those studies and the requirements to at least consider efficiency measures, because and just want to point out the direct kind of correlation between these code amendments and the ability to put a dent in our housing needs versus the if they're not kind of addressed within our boundaries, then that means that those housing needs are going to be addressed somewhere, and that usually means expansion of an urban growth boundary. So just want to remind that these code amendments are not being brought forth in a vacuum. They're in response to real studies and real requirements, and so that's why they're in front of you tonight. We've received a lot of public notice or public comments on these text amendments. Many of them have expressed some concerns. Some of them expressed support for these policies. The Planning Commission did review these on November 17th as well, had a spirited discussion during their hearing, but ultimately recommended approval of these to council in a unanimous fashion. Did want to note that there, and we'll review this in the presentation tonight, there's one little tweak addition that we did not include with the Planning Commission, and it relates to the middle housing unit types. There's discussion in the code amendments about changing lot sizes to accommodate the middle housing types, and adding some of those, considering adding triplex and quadplex to the residential zone. So that's a consideration. What we neglected to do in the Planning Commission version was to change the corresponding use table in the residential zone. It's more of a technicality. There was a understanding amongst the commission that of what they were approving, and including the proposal to add triplex and quadplex to allowed uses in the our residential zone district. So what we're trying to do here tonight is to make sure that that the use table is updated. Of course, the corresponding use table is also updated if you choose to go down that road with middle housing types. Matt will explain that again, so it'll sink in. So that's all I wanted to say on those topics, and I'll turn it over to Matt for a presentation.
All right, thanks, Scott. So I will share my screen again. Give me just a quick second here. All right, everybody see that okay? Okay, so this is just kind of a quick summary table to note the things that are included in the proposed or potential code amendments, as well as a couple of things that we talked about through the course of this process, but have not included in the proposed code amendments. So revising minimum and maximum densities, adjusting allowable building heights, and I'll say more about all of these things as I go through the presentation, eliminating floor area ratio requirements, updating the downtown commercial zone to allow in certain areas residential only developments. Those are all things that are part of the package of code amendments. Establishing parking incentives or reducing off-street parking requirements is not something that we're looking at tonight. That was one of the things that we said, hey, that really needs further study, pretty strong consensus on that. Adopting some density bonuses or lot size reduction incentives for affordable housing. That's something we're looking at, and that's really sort of changing some existing provisions you already have. Creating and or adjusting standards and for middle housing types and where they're allowed is something we're looking at tonight. We're not looking at refinements to your multifamily design standards. That is something we looked at during this process, and it is something you could look at further kind of down the line. Our sort of estimation was that's going to require a fair bit of community conversation, and we didn't want to try to shoehorn that into this set of amendments, but I can make some comments about that kind of later in the presentation, but we don't have any proposed changes. And when I say multifamily, I'm talking about 5 or more units on a single lot, which is different than triplexes and quadplexes or fourplexes. We are recommending some additional design standards for those types of dwellings if you choose to allow them in your residential zone. So that's what we're looking at, and I will walk through those. Again, I'll try to do it relatively expeditiously, but it's a lot of stuff. Some things I'll go through pretty quickly and others I might take a little more time on. So the first one is density allowed in your multifamily residential zone. So that's applies just to that zone. It doesn't apply to the downtown commercial zone or to the residential zone. Currently, you have a minimum density of 7 dwelling units per acre, up to a maximum of 15 allowed outright. You can go to between 15 and 20 through a minor conditional use process. The recommendation is to bump those minimum and maximum densities up to 15 to 30. We had a lot of conversation with housing providers about this, as well as the folks on our team who are market analysts and kind of look at these issues all around the state. And really 15 dwelling units per acre, particularly for, again, what I would call multifamily or apartment developments, is a very low density. It's really hard to make that pencil out or be feasible unless you have a lot of extra land on the site or are, just building a pretty low density development. So 25 to 30 is pretty typical, even for smaller communities around the state in terms of a maximum density. So that's the recommendation here, so that could be done not just as part of a much larger development or on a larger site, but if somebody came in with a development proposal like that, you would retain the minor conditional use process for densities between 30 and 40 dwelling units per acre. You would potentially, under these code amendments, allow up to 50 for qualified or eligible affordable housing developments. So someone would have to commit to building and maintaining those elements as being affordable to households in a certain income range to get that kind of density bump. We've got a few images that I'm going to show you, some of which we can tell you kind of what the density of those developments is. The bottom image on this slide is just an image of essentially single family detached homes. This is in Sisters. This is at 8 units per acre net. So that's kind of in your existing range. These are a couple of images of essentially townhouse or plex developments. And these are kind of in that 15 to 20 units per acre. So that does sort of allow for development of things like townhouses, that kind of density range. This is a development in Sisters, the Sisters First Street Apartments. This is an existing development within Sisters that's at about 30 dwelling units per acre. So this gives you a sense of what that can look like, or at least one example in Sisters. Couple other examples. We're sort of mindful of the fact that in terms of architectural design, these may not all be what you want to see here, but we're just trying to give you a sense of sort of the scale and massing of developments at different density levels. So the one on the left, 2 stories, but it's 44 dwelling units per acre. I think they get that through, in part, the off-street parking requirements and having some tuck-under parking there. The one on the right is in the range that we're suggesting you adopt, 27 dwelling units per acre, 3-story multifamily development there. Five Pines and Sisters, I actually don't know the development density there, but 3-story building. The top right, pretty dense, 54 dwelling units per acre, but it's done with essentially 3-story buildings and a common courtyard area. Bottom right is over in Bend at Northwest Crossing. That's senior housing that was developed at about 43 units per acre. And then bottom left is a development in Sandy, 3 stories at somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 units per acre for that one. And then these are just a couple other examples of kind of 4-story development, because we're going to talk about heights a little bit later. These are actually at higher densities than you would be allowing. So that's just kind of a summary of the density recommendations and just some images of what that can look like in terms of mass and scale. So one of the things we're also recommending is that you eliminate your floor area ratio requirements. Floor area ratio is essentially a calculation of, the division of the amount of floor area of a building divided by the square footage of the site. And a lot of some communities use this as sort of a primary way to regulate mass or scale of development. You already have a number of things that regulate mass and scale. The combination of building height, of off-street parking requirements, of setbacks, and landscaping requirements, they all end up sort of pointing you towards a floor area ratio, and having floor area ratio in addition, frankly, can make it fairly complicated and challenging to meet all of those requirements at the same time. We don't think the floor area ratio requirement really is necessary given all the other requirements in your code. And so we're recommending that you eliminate the floor area ratio requirements, retain all those other requirements. The other thing on this slide has to do with building height. So currently in your multifamily zone, you allow buildings up to 50 feet in height, but you only allow the first 35 feet of the building to be habitable space. We're recommending that you retain the 50-foot height, but you allow all of it to be habitable space. It doesn't change the allowed height or the scale of the buildings. It just means that if somebody's developing, they can use more of that building envelope for dwelling units, and that can help them improve the financial feasibility and the affordability of the units. So that's a recommendation. Again, only in the multifamily zone. We're not recommending changes to height requirements in any other zones. And in this case, not changing the maximum, just what's allowed to be habitable space. We identified some potential changes to some of the existing density bonus provisions you have in your code. So you have some of that now. we're recommending, we took a look at some other community standards in terms of how they approach this. These standards have been in your code for a while, but they really haven't been used much in the last, I think, 10 to 15 years is kind of what I heard from staff. So what we're proposing are some changes to those existing requirements where the reductions would depend on the amount and the type of affordable housing that's provided. In each case, that housing, those units would have to remain affordable over the long term. We have kind of melded some of your requirements with the approach that the city of Ashland takes. They've done a lot of work in their code over the years around incentives for affordable housing. And then we just did some cleanup and streamlining of some of your standards to eliminate some things that we didn't think were particularly necessary to be in the code, to make it just a simpler set of provisions. The bottom 3 bullets just note what the bonus is based on the type of housing that's being provided. There's also a cap on the total increase in density or decrease in average lot size you can get. So there's still kind of a threshold or a limitation on how much denser or how much smaller the lots can be on average. I think it's 30% is the overall or average cap on that. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this downtown commercial overlay zone. And what's being proposed here is in a portion of your downtown, or a couple of portions, I should say, of your downtown commercial overlay or commercial zone, that you allow for residential uses to be kind of standalone residential uses, not part of a mixed use development. So I've got a couple of maps here. This map is showing you the area where you already allow some residential only uses west of First Street and on either side of Adams Avenue. You actually already allow this for duplexes, townhomes, cottage developments, and manufactured dwellings. So that's already allowed in that area. And then the proposal would be to allow triplexes and multifamily development via a minor conditional use process without a commercial component or without a retail or commercial component in the areas that are outlined on this slide. So someone could still do a mixed use development in these areas. They could still have a retail or a commercial component on the ground floor, but they also could develop land in these areas as sort of purely residential. This doesn't change really the size and scale of the development that would be allowed. It just would allow for it to be residential only, as opposed to needing to have a commercial or retail component on the ground floor or somewhere else on the site for the use. A large part of the downtown commercial zone would continue to only allow residential as a component of a mixed use development. And that's what this map is showing is the area where you'd still need to have a non-residential component of development. So that's what's being proposed there. And this just shows the specific code language, the amended language in the portion of your code that defines this, and the maps would essentially go along with this amended language. So now I'm going to talk about one of the topics that y'all raised earlier in the meeting, and that is the proposal to allow plexes, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in the residential zone. As Scott noted, this was one of the recommended strategies, and we had included in the text amendments the recommended changes to lot sizes, both in the multifamily zone, but also in the residential zone for these types of dwellings or houses. But as he said, we had neglected to include the revisions to the use table in the text amendments. So that's what we're showing you here. So duplexes would be allowed under these proposed amendments. Duplexes would be allowed in the residential zone. Triplexes and fourplexes also would be allowed, and with some special design standards that would be applied to them in that zone. So that's just the use table change. We are also proposing, if you are going to allow those in the residential zone, that you would reduce the allowable or the minimum lot size for those types of dwellings. Same thing in the multifamily district. The point of doing this is that right now, the required lot sizes for these types of homes make it really unlikely that they will be developed. They just are not, there's no sort of financial feasibility incentive to develop them at the lot sizes you require now. You're always going to essentially see a single family detached home developed on those lots, given the amount of land that's currently required for those housing types in your code. So the proposal is, if you are going to allow those in these zones, then it really should be at a lot size that makes it feasible to develop them. If you really want to have that option or those choices, that's an important component of that. So the recommendation is to reduce the minimum lot size to reflect a certain number of square feet per dwelling unit for those uses. So for duplexes, 3,000 square feet per unit. For triplexes, quadplexes, and townhomes or single family attached, 2,500 square feet per unit. Cottage development, we haven't made any changes there. We just added them to this table to be clear about what the allowable lot size is, but that's already reflected in your code. And no change on multifamily. It wouldn't, which is again 5 or more units on a single property. That's not proposed to be allowed in your residential district, and we're proposing to continue to use density as the measure there in the multifamily district. This is the longest part of my presentation. Sorry about that, because I'm going to now talk about some proposed development standards that would be applied to duplexes and triplexes, and they relate to several things. The orientation of the main entrance to the home, how parking is configured, and some design features that you would potentially require for these types of uses. So this first set of graphics talks about orientation of the entry of the home, that it essentially would face or be face the street or be in close proximity to the front of the building. So that's just kind of what this is showing, or within a distance of the front of the building, but sort of facing the entry of the home across from it. In terms of parking, the point here is either to have alley loaded parking, which reduces kind of the curb cuts and the driveways in front of the buildings. But if you don't have an alley loaded development, that you would limit the width, the combined width of driveways for these types of development, for triplexes and quadplexes. So that you don't have as much of that sidewalk broken up by kind of large shared driveways, or more than 50% of the frontage is not a driveway. So that's kind of what these images are showing you. And then this is some similar images for townhomes. Again, that, in terms of improving pedestrian safety and comfort and not breaking up that sidewalk with driveways, the best approach is frankly to have access for cars from the rear of the homes. But if you don't have that, the recommendation is to put some limitations on the width of the driveways that serve the fronts of those units, and that's what we're showing here. And then finally, the recommended requirement to ensure that there are some design features associated with these types of housing, so that they're not just a box with no visual interest, with no variation in the facade. So there are a number of different kind of a menu of design features. And this is pretty similar to the way you treat actually multifamily development in terms of the architectural design standards for that. But someone would need to include at least 3 of these elements on the facade of one of these types of units. So that's what these are showing. And then you would also have some minimum requirements for the amount of the facade or the front of the house that's covered by windows. So at least 15% of the front of the building would be covered by windows or a door with a clear glass in it. So I want to acknowledge that the middle housing stuff is a lot. And kind of early in the process, we weren't sure we'd be bringing that forward in terms of a set of potential code amendments for y'all to be thinking about tonight. But based on discussion with the Planning Commission and staff, we said, let's talk about this. If you choose not to go down that road, you can go down that road later if you so choose. But we wanted to be able to at least have the discussion with you and present a fairly complete package of amendments related to those types of housing, where they'd be allowed, what the lot sizes would be, and what types of standards would be applied to those different types of dwellings. And again, I would just say that the point of that really is, of all of that, is to broaden the choices for different types of housing without going so far as to allow in your residential zone what I would think of as sort of more intensive multifamily development. So that's my description of all those code amendments. Thanks for your patience and having me kind of zoom through that, or maybe take too long, I don't know. And just in terms of next steps, potential adoption by the council. I think this is actually more for the efficiency measures report. So we can just kind of ignore this particular slide. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
All right. Thank you very much. Before we get to the council, we'll ask if we have received any correspondence on this matter. And I guess I'm asking Carrie and Scott.
We did receive a email this afternoon about 3 o'clock. I did forward it to you guys via email. We also have copies. I don't have copies, do you?
They have it.
They have copies. This is something.
Oh, we have copies.
Sorry, I have copies.
Nope.
I have copies of other things, but
Yeah, there you go. No, we got them.
you
up
have the
here.
copy of the letter, the email, yeah.
And they're in the record, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Anything else other than what was included in the packet? That's the one.
That's it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. At this time, I will ask each counselor whether they have any questions for staff. Questions will be stated by each counselor. Staff will respond after all questions have been asked. When your name is called, please ask your questions or indicate that you have no questions. Gary, I know you're chomping at the bit a little bit,
Well,
but because you brought it up before, we might as well go ahead and let you go first and bring up your ideas.
Well, this is where it fell apart for me. And I could understand everything up to here. When you get down into the code, the only way I could see to implement or to do the things that I would like to see, that i.e. let's have more discussion on what we can allow within the zone, would be to eliminate, I guess, in table 2.2.2, the things that I see there. I can't find where it talks about that in the document that we received, where those changes are. And there's a lot of stuff that I know I missed it, but I can't find it. That's why I wasn't paying attention.
No, it's okay. And that's what we have Matt and Scott for, I think, that can point out his concerns.
Your question was where the table that would allow those, or add those uses to the mix is?
Where the code changes are. Is it the table? Is that the code change?
That's one of them. Are you talking specifically about the residential zone district
Yes.
right now and the potential addition of additional
Yes.
housing units? So it's in there currently, but it's under development standards where it talks about modifying the lot sizes for those
I have
things.
that in front of me.
So that's in there. The one that wasn't in there that we have are proposing to add that Matt, and this is not new information. It's more just a kind of a technical issue. The discussion at Planning Commission was full awareness that this was the proposal. It's just that there's two different tables in the residential zone district. One talks about lot sizes. The other one talks about the types of land uses that are allowed in that zone district. And that table is the one that we did not update, that we're proposing. It's no,
Hence my confusion.
It's no, I mean, it's in there, it's represented in the table where it talks about lot sizes. It clearly underlines triplex and quadplex as proposed uses. And then this, should I hand this out? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was just,
Table 2,
that was just an oversight on our part. That was just an oversight on our part.
Well, I don't.
There
I
we
don't know
go.
that. I know that you didn't intend for me to read it, so,
Yeah.
We gave you too much time.
yeah, you did. I've read it many times, it's like,
okay.
yeah. So, again, this comes back around to why I wanted to do this in an earlier document, where it's clear what the intent was. I am still very uncomfortable. You might be able to talk me into a duplex in a true residential zone. But when you start talking, and when I look at the middle housing design standards and other standards, and I look at the pictures that are presented, you know, in order to make it pencil out for a fourplex, you've got to go 2.5 to 3 stories. That then towers over the other houses in the neighborhood. It also means that if it's a tree lot, you're gonna have to clear pretty much most of the trees on that part of the lot. So it changes the character of what you see in a number of these neighborhoods. Now, I can't speak to the neighborhood across the street here. It looks like it's residential as well, because I'm not that familiar with it. But, you know, I've seen, and I know where Nancy is, that she's in an MFR zone, but they're all single-family residents in that MFR zone. Someone could choose to tear the house down and put a duplex up or something. That's fine with me. But I think that the contract that we have, a city, have with our residents, when someone comes in and purchases a residential lot and builds a residential home, choosing not to be in an MFR neighborhood, and that's a choice, that we're changing the rules, and that makes me uncomfortable, especially if we haven't gone out and talked to the residents of the community to see if they support it.
Okay. So I have a question along that line.
Okay.
On this table, there's permitted, which means obviously that's the outright, that's the word outright, correct?
Yep.
The word conditional, which we mentioned in the last, in the efficiency plan measures report, we talked about conditional. What does conditional mean, and what are ways that we could put a condition on it that allows us to have some flexibility in this, where, you know, what are the types of conditions? We have special provisions shown here and conditional use. Can you just really quickly explain that, what those two things are?
Yeah. MCU and,
Sure.
yeah.
Thank you.
So MCU stands for minor conditional use. And so you have permitted uses and you have minor conditional uses. And permitted uses is a use that nobody really questions it in a zone district. It's by right. You don't have to request any further approval from the city. A conditional use is something that could be an allowable use, but potentially has some impacts. And if you can adequately mitigate those impacts, prove that you can adequately mitigate those impacts, then that can be a use that would be adequate or approvable in a neighborhood. But it does require an extra layer of review. There's a little bit more subject, even though we're trying to get away from this, subjectivity to the process, which you know, folks don't like because sometimes it can be at the whims of the planner or the community in terms of what they like and they don't like.
Whims of the planner?
I know this
Planners
is,
have
Planners have
whims?
whims? I'm doing that same thing.
I'm giving out some secrets here. I mean, no, that's why the state is actually, you know, passing laws to require more clear and objective set of standards. And when you go into conditional use, you're kind of getting out of that framework a little bit. I think Matt could probably address this. You know, he's probably seen it in other communities where they've updated their conditional use criteria to be a little more objective and a little less subjective. But that's the difference between the two. If you go to a conditional use, it requires notice of the neighbors so that they can provide input. And that's the basic difference between the two.
And so even a minor conditional use would require notice to the neighbors.
Yes, I'm going to confirm that, but I believe that to be the case, yes. It's done as a type It's a type 2, which yeah, we notice all type 2 permits. So that brings the neighborhood component into play.
Yeah, and I would just add or reiterate something Scott said, which is that it is really important that you have clear and objective standards for any type of housing that's allowed in a zone. And so if you want to allow those as, say, through a minor conditional use process, the standards you apply and the way in which you apply them really do need to be clear and objective. They need to be things you can measure. They need to be things, measure. My wife always bugs me for saying measure. Anyway, they need to be measurable, and they need to be things that don't allow for sort of a level of discretion, because if they're allowing for a level of discretion, then they're no longer clear and objective. So that's just really important. So I think I'm not saying you can't do that, but you would want to take a hard look at your minor conditional use approval criteria and standards before implementing that as a way to allow those types of housing in that residential zone. And you might in some ways be better off sort of punting that down the road, because I wouldn't want you to get in trouble from a legal perspective or a state law perspective in terms of applying that, if that's the only path to approve that kind of housing in that zone. That could be a problem. So I just want to raise that issue. You just want to make sure that those represent clear and objective standards if you're gonna go that route. So I would just note that.
I don't disagree with anything I've heard. That's why I think I'd like to move this to the more discussion area and get a better feel for where we are as a community. I think we have a lot of things that people are uncomfortable with, and some of them are probably valid, and some of them are probably not. Mine may be in the not category, but I think that we don't have to rush into this, particularly this one, because we're not required by state law to deal with it. And
Okay.
that's my thinking.
Yeah. Not to cut you short, but I think the overall discussion will be in the council deliberations after we
Oh,
finish
okay.
the discussion.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
We're just asking questions to staff now, then we'll have,
Thanks for the,
we'll have public testimony. We'll have, we'll go down the list and we'll get there.
good job, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, not a problem. Do you have any other questions about any other part?
Nope.
Okay, Jennifer?
Can you circle back to me?
Sure. Andrea?
No questions.
None.
I don't have an either, so we're back at you.
Well then, okay, I
Should I
did
talk
write down,
longer?
I did write down one question.
Yeah.
And tell me if this may be an efficiency measure, so cut me off if I'm in the wrong spot. Because there's the definition, we're adopting definitions as well. Is that part of this, or is that the next phase?
Well, it's part of, there's some new definitions that we're throwing in there for the workforce housing and.
Right, and I just had some questions about the definitions regarding income and affordable housing. Are these commonly recognized definitions? And I followed up quickly, just kind of curious where they came from. Are they kind of, commonly used by, planners in other areas? And also, again, there's a little bit of, is there something more solid they can be tied to, like a specific index or a product that, the state or something produces that says, this is the area median income? And I think I would just like it if it had something a little more, we could tie it to, and also, maybe a time frame, like this is adjusted on an annual basis or something. It seemed a little open-ended.
So those are commonly used definitions, both in other communities and in state and other funding programs. Area median income, because it varies in every community, and we don't and no one really specifies what the actual number is in their code because they have to be updating it all the time. But it's also a term used in the census. So yeah, those are pretty commonly used definitions, I would say. And we just want to make sure that any term that's used in the code is defined and defined in the way it's commonly used. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm just curious if I was a builder and I was wondering if I would want something more specific or robust and just, okay, well, who is deciding what the median income is? What standard are we using? What year, I mean, it doesn't, that detail doesn't have to be in there, but it's just that, and we will use this index or this product to define that. I'm just trying to make this process easier. So.
I have a follow-up question with that. Like the term middle housing, that's both an affordability phrase, and it's also a phrase of just a type of construction.
Yes.
And that, I think that's where the confusion is lying. So it has a definition, right? But it's not tied to income. It's just an area of construction, correct?
The middle housing?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, it's just a form. It's kind of a term that captures several different forms of housing. So it's sort of a kind of a commonly
If
used.
they were doing true affordable housing that was classified as middle housing, that would kick in other requirements, correct? I mean, if they were going to do affordable housing that was in the middle housing spectrum of construction, then there would be other things that kicked in. Is that correct?
If they're asking for density bonuses and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah. Okay.
Or seeking funding from the state or federal government, or to the extent you were to implement some of the other strategies in the housing plan update. Yeah, that would be the case.
I kind of think that's where it's like two things, but sometimes it's the same and sometimes it's not. So
You did include a dictionary, I thought, in there that explained what
yeah.
AMI was, so it is written down and documented in one of these documents.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That was it.
Yeah.
Everybody had an opportunity, right? So thank you all for answering the questions. We will now invite members of the audience to provide testimony. We'll ask people in the room and also on Zoom. So people on Zoom, get ready. If you're providing testimony, please state your name and address for the record before proceeding with your testimony. Carrie?
Chris Converse,
I have no comment.
Clayton Crowhurst,
No testimony.
Eric Strobel,
No testimony.
John Tehan.
Yes, I do have a couple things I wanted to bring up. And the two things I wanted to bring up, this is separate. One is when they talk about, this was brought up in the Planning Commission meeting last week, when they talk about the 50-foot height, that I believe this is true, and if not, somebody can correct me, that yes, we do allow 50-foot in Sisters, but we don't have any 50-foot height buildings at this time. That was the one thing that it was interesting because I was caught off guard by that, because I was assuming by the way it's presented that we have 50-foot buildings already. It is coded, but we don't have any. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was Commissioner Ross's comments on the single family, that I don't hear any mention of accessory dwellings, which are, to my take, are something comparable to duplexes. And those are an allowed use in most of our housing areas now. If you looked at Rolling Horse, Timber Creek, Saddlestone, over at the grade school, that, and Commissioner Roth referred to that, and even in the old Old Town, south of Main, of Cascade. There's not a lot of them over there yet, but these other subdivisions, if we call them that, they have accessory dwellings. And we did make a change to our accessory dwelling codes not too long ago, took away family member, I believe, having to live there to try and help with this. And also in Saddlestone, we have accessory dwelling right now in a 3,300 square foot lot, and it's cramped. So anyway, that's what I had to say for just consideration. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I think those things need to be thought through, as Commissioner Ross has said. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Judy Smith?
I don't have any comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah McDougall
No testimony.
and Susan Cobb.
I do have some testimony. As far as increasing density, I was wondering if there was any, I don't expect an answer, but I was wondering if there was any looking at the various lots in town that have these dilapidated homes on rather large lots, maybe that are maybe double lots or triple lots, but they owned by one person with a dilapidated either trailer or home. And wonder if there would be a way of incentivizing those owners by purchasing their land in a kind of a trade where Habitat would refurbish the dilapidated building in exchange for the cost of the land that the Habitat and city would then take over. I just thought I'd throw that out there because that's a way of increasing density and also improving the look of the town.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. My name's Kevin Eckert. I'm at 521 West Hope Ave in Sisters. I want to, as some other people have, acknowledge and thank everybody for their work on this last year. I spend my days trying to create more pathways to housing for more people, and what we're doing here today is going to help as far as more access to housing for more folks at more income levels. I'm such a proponent, I don't think we're doing enough, but I appreciate what we are doing. So I'll be pushing for that second round of changes next year. I think we have opportunity to keep Sisters charming. I think we have opportunity to address folks who are worried about change. And I believe we have an opportunity to house school teachers and friends of mine that are concerned they won't be here next year because they're going to get priced out. So I support the text amendments that we're talking about right now. I support the ordinance that's coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we're out of people, so.
Oh, nope.
Oh, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
You couldn't see you.
No, that's, I get missed a lot.
It happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
I apologize, really. I
No,
was
no
looking at the
worries,
script.
no worries, no worries. Chris Dudley, you need my address, right? 16707 Old Military Drive, Sisters, Oregon. I don't really, the one comment that was made online that I brought up at the Planning Commission was going from 35, even though 50 is approved today, I think that's a little bit misleading because there is no 50 anywhere, and there's a reason for that, is because you can't habitat 35 from 35 feet to 50. So that's a pretty big jump, and I just don't, I don't have a strong, all I would encourage is talk to the neighbors, figure out where it's going to be, because as the commissioner stated, that could look out of place in certain areas. So it's not, I just, going from 35 to 50 is a big jump. And I think everybody's on the same, I mean, you guys hear the same thing I hear, is keep sisters, sisters. Don't want it to look like Bend. Certainly don't want it to look like Portland. And I just appreciate the comment, keep the character. So I would just be cautious in that, in jumping to that size. And then also the jump from 15, a max of 15 per acre up to 50, that's a pretty big jump. I mean, that's the 3X. Granted, that's for affordable, and I know there's stages. But again, just kind of really eyes wide open, because it's hard to go backwards once you do this. And what it'll look like, what it'll do to the character of the town. And the other thing, it's a struggle, and the affordable issue is everywhere. And I grew up in Southern California, big issue there. And all I would say is it's something that we want to work on. We want to have more affordable housing, want our kids to be able to live here, our teachers to be able to live here. But we have to be careful too, because just because you make something more dense doesn't mean it's always more affordable. I've seen that down the beaches in Southern California. And what it does do is change the character of the town. So you have to keep an eye on both. And unless you're subsidizing, the affordable issue is something that can get away from you. So again, not really strongly one way or the other, but I would just say really take these into consideration. I think it's an admirable cause, but just be careful with it and how quickly we go from 15 to 50 and add another 15 feet to the maximum height. So, and I would like to echo also, appreciate all the work and time and effort you guys are putting into this. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it, Chris. All right. Without any further public testimony, anybody else? I'm sorry. All right, we're going to close the hearing, and now we go to council deliberations.
How about we have a break?
Yeah, can we do a 5-minute break? Joe said no. No, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll be
You're
back
fired.
in 5 minutes.
I am going to leave the recording running and the mics will be on.
Yeah, mics are hot, so careful. Thank you, good idea. Appreciate it.
Yeah, she decorated the lobby. She helped decorate the lobby, excuse me. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do you go with it?
That's where his Midwest comes out. So yeah, we got extra slides. Love to have you.
Yeah, I'll have to do that.
Okay, so.
That's very sad. Yeah, exactly. That's the way to do it.
He was trying to get people. The tree stump. Oh yeah. So this is still.
Oh, it turned out well. Yeah, another good year. Yeah, last 2 years have worked out well.
There's a lot of people who are.
Right.
You know, when they don't know.
Yeah, he brings them over. He brings them over. Just good.
Right, because there's, well, and there's, it does touch on it, and there are different design standards.
We've already done all of our
Design standards are trying to.
tonight. It started at 5 o'clock today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's been great.
So I think that's why they made these design standards. I'm glad they brought this.
Sometimes it's not well.
You guys get out. One guy.
Sometimes I go on the street.
Oh, it's. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. I haven't, you tell me downtown. So I did it before. Did you? Yeah. And, with the guys. Yeah. And I actually. Here's how you use it. Two of us.
You guys doing shots? My mic is on. Shots of cupcakes. Sorry.
Some more syrup on this. Yeah, so.
You never know what's gonna happen. They freak out. Makes you feel any better. Makes you feel any better. Was. Yeah. It wasn't. I'm being serious. Okay.
I don't know if
Did you see any of them?
And that was
How long were you? We're on some borrowed time with our kids.
Are we reconvening? We're out here.
Oh, she is, okay. And that's been a few weeks, hasn't it, Michael? She's been back a few weeks. I saw her.
Well, she came before Halloween.
Yeah, that's right. I saw her at Halloween.
But
That's Julie.
Yeah.
It's Julie. She is. She's
Oh, cool.
You didn't? Oh, good.
I'm coming to talk to you. How do I do it?
Go to school. Get a tour. Yeah.
I don't know how I figure all this stuff out.
They're happy.
This is incredible.
Oh,
Oh, maybe we'll do it Monday.
They're almost sick. Off the building.
Yeah.
Staff will still be there.
Yeah, her last.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Give her a tour.
For sure. Yeah, right, right.
Gavel that.
Yeah.
That's a 3-timer. I've never done that before.
That's serious.
That felt great.
I'm intimidated.
Man, that felt awesome. I want to do that more often. No. Okay, so we're, let's see, we did public testimony. We closed the hearing, and we're at council deliberations at this point. Obviously, if we have questions of staff, we can ask them, right? So that's not a problem.
You want to
but-
take it like one element at a time?
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea. Take Gary's element and go, how does everybody feel about it? And, see if there's a compromise position or if there's a position we all want to take, whatever. And, this is a little more free flow. This is deliberations, so let's throw it all out there. Gary's is the hottest topic, I would say, but there's other topics and, height. Well, height might be one of them. I know you have a couple of things and, I know
I don't think.
you got a couple things.
Hottest topics.
So, but Gary, I don't mind taking yours first and just,
I'm fine
saying,
with that.
obviously Matt was our consultant was saying, conditional uses are great and all, but they're not clear and objective. And he would intimated that, we either give the clear use or not have a clear use. Do you have a strong opinion on any of that?
Yeah, I think that the triplex, fourplex really concern me in terms of scale in what I see around here as residential neighborhoods, the R zones.
Yeah.
And in terms of height, because you have to go up to make those work.
Yeah.
In terms of driveways, if you look at some of the sample buildings, in the case of the neighborhood I'm familiar with, Tai or Wapato or Locust, those would all have to be front-loaded.
Yeah. Can we possibly get that map up there again? The zoning map? Matt, are you still here?
I am still here. It was actually Andrew,
Yeah, I'll get that up in just a moment. Yeah.
Andrew that brought it up, but yeah, he'll bring it up.
Thank you. And so
Go ahead.
that, for instance, if you put a fourplex in, you're going to have single vehicle driveways in order to get the footprint of the building in facing the street. And, you know, I think the drawing is very accurate in terms of what you have to do. So that means you're presuming that everybody that moves in that fourplex has one vehicle. Good luck with that. So where are the other vehicles going to go? Well, they can go on the street. A lot of us do park on the street some. But, you know, one of the things we're going to be talking about as we develop streets out and sidewalks and things like that is how much on-street parking do we want to allow versus in the driveway parking. But I think my biggest concern is not even so much that, it's scale. It is what fits. Now, I've seen some really nice looking townhomes and some really nice looking duplexes that fit in and you really wouldn't know. But I think when you start making it bigger, you start to have issues. And like, I can't talk to the R zone that is up by the elementary school. I really haven't spent much time in that neighborhood.
Well, there's duplexes there already.
Yeah.
I mean, duplexes.
Yeah,
How did they get there?
Well, are they on corners? A lot of
Scott.
communities allow duplexes on corner lots because then they could have two addresses.
Duplexes are allowed currently, so that's already in the code. That's
Yeah.
how they.
They're
So
already,
duplexes are allowed.
they're I mean, they're an outright use.
Permitted.
But they're actually, I think they're an conditional use.
Okay.
They are a conditional
Okay.
use, yes.
Okay.
'Cause I looked at that. And, you know, and so that's the ones that concern me really. And while I appreciate John's comment that we have a lot of homes with ADUs and that's essentially a duplex, I don't quite agree with that in terms of the house that's already there and that.
And they do have a size maximum of 800 square, or 600 or 800 square feet, so.
Yeah, so, you know, and cottage developments, I could see what some of those could fit into if it's done right into some of the areas because of, but, you know, and then we look at some of the lots in town that back up. If you take the lots that, some of our lots have a small buildable footprint, but they're big lots. So if you have a, you know, 11, 12,000 square foot lot, but the buildable footprint is significantly less because of floodplain considerations, how does that affect the calculation that we're using of 4,500 square feet? You know, in other words, do you take the entire lot size and now you can jam a whole bunch of crap in there?
Well,
Or do we
not if you have other, you know, let me give you an example. If you have other restrictions such as, I have a pie-shaped lot, and it's 10,000 square feet, but a duplex is the most you could ever put on it.
Right.
Even though I'm big enough to have,
Because of setbacks?
because of setbacks and the shape of it, there's no way I could get a fourplex on there.
And I will admit, I tried to read about zero lot lines and I got even more confused, so.
Yeah,
You know,
that's for townhomes,
well, I mean, but
adjoined townhomes.
it did
And
appear that
DC.
you could have, there was some language about if you have a zero lot line home, how far it had to be away from neighboring lots. And that's where it got really confusing.
Yeah, it
Did
was a
be
little confusing.
5 feet, did it have to be 8 feet, 10 feet, whatever. But to me, right now, there's so many unanswered questions about how you would make this work and work right. That's what my uncomfortableness is with it. And I do think that we have, I feel strongly that there is a contract between the people who live in the long zoned neighborhoods, that this is what they're zoned as. And if we're gonna change it, I think we need to put the word out and ask them. That's really what I'm saying. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying I wanna know what people think about it. You know, and I already know what some people think, and I know what some other people think. Some are positive, some are negative.
Okay.
But triplex, fourplex to me is not a good fit, period.
Okay, so we know what you think, and I'm not trying to cut you off, but we got to find out what the rest of us think about that. You have a comment on that?
I do. If you go down Jefferson Street, which is not in this zone, it's just one block south, you have $1 million home next to a older, original Forest Service home that could use some repair next to a duplex, and they all get along fine. And going back to what the U of O students presented yesterday, lost the day. You know, Sisters is a quilt. It's a patchwork of new buildings, old buildings, infill, that as the city evolves and grows, that is going to happen. I do not have a problem having a duplex or a triplex in that residential zone. I think we've given a year's worth of public input. How many public hearings, how many planning commission meetings, how many articles in the Nugget? As elected officials, our job is to represent what is best for the community based upon all the information we have. On top of that, the planning commission has had even more hearings and more input and more expertise because this is the only thing they've been dealing with. Whereas council, we're not experts in the planning department field because we have all the other issues that face town. So I'm confident in the feedback that we've had from the public. I understand your concern that we should notice, and maybe that's where the ordinance has a special provision listed by it, so it's cited or noted with a, one of our yellow signs. But I don't think we should outright ban it from happening.
Well, to me, I
If we
agree
notice
with you.
it, it's great.
Yep. It's the conditional use thing that outright was the word that really got me. And
I'm okay with that, right? But if it.
yeah, and Nancy, and I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, but the thing I would argue is that $1 million home, they chose to build it next to that older home. And the difference is you have planned neighborhoods, and now you're going to change the way that planned neighborhood exists. So that's really kind of the thing. And I agree with your position, by the way, on that.
That's it.
Okay. Jennifer?
Just an overarching comment, going through this whole process and reading through all this, the struggle was, and shall be that I think a lot of these recommendations are good, and I know that they've been well vetted, as Councilor Connolly just mentioned. My struggle is that we have this patchwork quilt of zoning, bizarre zoning in our community. And so while some of these standards I like, they would be great if I could shuffle all of those zoning areas around to where these standards were more appropriate for each of the neighborhoods. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. Will we get to the point where we can do a thorough review and shifting of more appropriate zoning at some day? Probably not soon, except for I know we hopefully have some tweaks coming up here in the next 6 months, hopefully. But that's been my overarching struggle, or filter I've been looking at all this stuff through. So while I hear Councilor Ross's concerns, especially for the R zoning on the south end of town, I think there's portions in the north, the northeast corner, where outright use of this would be appropriate, because there are lots and such up there that would be great fits for a triplex or a quadplex. But I mean, I could be swayed to it being a conditional use. I only struggle with that because I don't think any of us want to make government more difficult. I think we want to promote housing, and one way we do that is make a more streamlined process, whether you're a big developer or any of us humble people up here who might take on a single project. But that's my nebulous input on that.
Okay, Andrea, on this, residential issue with the duplexes, triplexes and more? I'd say actually it's only triplexes and quadplexes. I think we're all okay with the duplexes for now.
It's already allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, conditions.
It's allowed, we're just making it easier. Yeah.
Right.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I live in a subdivision where everybody purchased it assuming certain zoning restrictions. And there was talk of, oh, well, this lot might end up, the neighboring lot might end up being an apartment building, and everybody was totally freaked. And I said, well, why are you freaked about that? Well, because look at somewhere, there's an apartment in town that's just you know, it'll be like that. Well, no, it won't. We have design standards now that were not in effect when that was built, so it will not look like that necessarily. Well, still, so I understand the hesitancy of people assuming the worst case scenario if a triplex or a fourplex is going to be built next door. And I have a single level home, and so if there was a fourplex next to me, but it would be the same if it was a townhouse or whatever, it could have its patio outside overlooking my backyard.
It could be a single family house.
And it could, yeah, absolutely. But, you know, in my neighborhood, they would never do that because that wouldn't be kosher. But anyway, so I understand the hesitancy for it. And I feel in general that we're going 10 step forwards when we should be doing 2-step, 2-step, 2-step. So I guess I would say that if I am in favor of conditional uses. And I know they have to be very strictly defined, but I think we need them. And we have conditional uses now on all kinds of things. And so I don't know that what would be the conditions that we would implement if we said, okay, 3plexes and 4plexes will be allowed under a conditional use, and the conditions would be that they didn't build in the view. The conditions would be, what kind of conditions would you see that would make it so that the neighborhoods would be notified? They could come and say, what are the conditions under which this can be built? And then they would say, I could live with that. But what would those conditions be?
I think it's a matter of trying to keep the scale of the neighborhood in check. So could be a 2-story building might be fine, but a 3 or 4-story building, which you might allow under code changes, might not be fine. And although I don't think we'd allow that in our zone, I'd do it somewhere else. But, you know, the idea that, you know, moving duplexes to a permitted, I can see that fitting in, I can. It's the triplexes and fourplexes, and I've lived in neighborhoods with them in other communities. The process of trying to put that together on a non-alley loading lot is real tricky, and trying to make it not overpower the scale of the neighborhood or create issues in the neighborhood related to having a single car garage as opposed to larger, for instance, you know, and then what happens when you have a CCR that requires every building to have a double car garage? So does the code override the CCR? So if we say we allow fourplexes and you have covenants and restrictions in a neighborhood development that says everybody has to have a 2-car garage or 3-car garage, minimum garage size 2-car. So, and we put in a fourplex, we only have one. See, I'm trying to figure out how does that work with existing legal documents that bind the homeowner?
Generally, if there isn't anything to the contrary, you can, covenants can make things more restrictive than the city code. They just can't make it any less restrictive.
So if let's take Timber Creek over here.
Timber Creek, sure.
Which I think has pretty strict design standards, because I looked at a lot over there. And I think one of them is 2-car garage, I believe, is part of it. And minimum building size and things like that. So then you come in on a vacant lot and you try to put in a duplex. I think it's only wide enough for a triplex, to be honest with you. Then that it says it's permitted use, but it really isn't under the CCRs. So then you start to create inequities in neighborhoods based upon how recently they were developed or built. Because I'll bet that up in the area by the elementary school, there's probably not much up there for CCRs or HOA restrictions, because they've been there a long time, and that's kind of a newer thing. I know that in Buck Run, where we are, the CCRs and restrictions are really pretty minimal. Go down, like I said, you go down to Pine Meadow Village, and they're probably 7 or 8.
It's a document like
Yeah,
this.
yeah, exactly. It's a-
I'm platted as Lowe and Brothers from 1910 or something, before there was even a city, I believe.
So, yeah,
Okay.
that's the whole thing. So I guess that what would make me say, okay, if we could do it, is let's say triplex as a MCU. Don't put fourplex in the residential zone, at least for now anyway. And then make permitted on duplexes. To me, that's a compromise I can live with. I think if we look at a UGB expansion, if we look at bringing new residential land in, that's when I think we have the ability to sit down and say that we want to see this kind of development, triplexes, fourplexes. We want a mix of types of housing types in a neighborhood. That's the real good time to do it, when that land is bare, it's going to be developed up, and we're going to decide what we're going to do.
I had that comment as well on a number of things.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where I am on this. And
But what would the conditions be?
well, I don't.
If you're not going to point out what the conditions would be, then what's the point in having it? You have to have.
Well,
Scott,
Well,
please weigh
I
in.
can tell you what our existing code says, and it's the general subjective language that the state's saying you got to get away from. And I'll just kind of give you an indication of what kind of things it says, and then maybe Matt, if you've
This is
seen.
for duplexes?
This is just for conditional uses in general.
Oh, okay.
This is not specific to any type of use, but one of the criteria is that the location, size, design, and operating characteristics of the proposed use will be compatible with and will not have a significant adverse effect on the appropriate development and use of abutting properties and the surrounding neighborhood. Consideration shall be given to scale, bulk, coverage, and density, the availability of civic facilities and utilities, to harmful effects, if any, upon desirable neighborhood characteristics and livability, to the generation of traffic, those kinds of things. So you can see how it could get really subjective.
That's
So,
clear as mud.
yeah. I don't know if, Matt, have you seen some communities that have revised their conditional use criteria to be quote unquote clear and objective?
Yeah, I have. It is challenging because most communities that have conditional use approval criteria, they're pretty similar to some of the things you have, and they're not particularly clear or objective. They just involve a lot of discretion. I mean, that what you just read is a perfect example. I will say that so when you really just need that, you need to be able to quantify and again, measure those things. It's not that you can't incorporate some of those same types of things, but they need to be much more precisely written. The other thing I'll say is I recently went through a project in Gold Beach, an even smaller town than Sisters, on the Southern Oregon coast. They amended their primary, they actually combined all their residential districts into a single residential district. I've got to say, I've never seen this done anywhere else in Oregon. The way they handled things like this was to say, if you're just building one of these things, it's an outright permitted use. If you're building more than one, then you need to do public notice. It needs to go through a type 2 review process, but it's not a conditional use, but it needs to have some additional public noticing that is being proposed. It still also needs to meet all their standards related to dealing with natural hazards and natural resources. So I've seen that done too, where you kind of have an elevated process, but the standards are still essentially clear and objective standards. So yeah, I haven't seen a ton of cities update their conditional use standards to try to make them clear and objective, because it's pretty challenging, but occasionally I have. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot easier to do it with just your architectural design standards that you apply to everything in a zone. Those are much easier to kind of make clear and objective. And you can have some standards that relate to kind of the mass or size of the building that are clear and objective, and that also create some transition or buffer, between a larger building and an adjacent smaller buildings. There are things you can do. Yeah, sorry, I can't be a little bit technical on that.
No, appreciate it. I'm going to throw in my weight on it, and I align with Nancy. I really like how she said, how much we've been through this, And I think that with the subjective use of conditional uses, I think what I would rather do is make a simple change to this, something that we can all agree on is, okay, I think we're all okay with duplexes. I think we're talking about triplexes and quadplexes right now and just trying to figure out what we can swallow and what we can possibly defer to another time. And if everybody can kind of think about that in that fashion, maybe we can come to an agreement where on this particular text item, we can make a really simple thing saying this is permitted and this is not permitted, whatever you think. I think I'm under the idea of all the things that I vote on this council, when I'm voting on something, that there is always the possibility I'm making a mistake. And I've said this before on other items, that it's not written in granite, and then we can pass something or not pass something and then catch up with it in a year from now and just test case it in a lot of ways. So I would like to pass this as it is, but Gary, I understand that you have some issues. If you could maybe compromise and say, triplexes I can maybe live with, and we can test case it for a year and then visit it a year from now, or put it in our planning for next year to say, hey, let's look at it again and see if anything's been built in the next year or two. And maybe we do permitted use for triplex, and then maybe quadplex, maybe we're not ready for those. Is that something you could live with?
I thought I was following you to the last sentence, but yeah. I think that permitted use on duplex, fine. I mean, clearly it's been an MCU, so yeah, you just remove that. And I think that's representative of what was already happening in those neighborhoods. So all you're really saying is that they don't have to go through the process.
Yeah, we've got lots of them, and really very few of them are an issue. I mean,
Right, oh yeah, and I think that if I looked at the triplex as an MCU, listen to what he said, I think that your clear and objective standards would really have to be more related to it fitting into the neighborhood. And how do you do that? Again, that's not a clear standard, but it may be that it has to, like I said, certain design standards that exist in a neighborhood or something like that. That's where it gets tricky, because the bigger the mass of the building, the harder it is for that mass to look like it belongs. Now, and so when you get beyond 2 stories, you have to start going up. Now, if you can only go up, beyond a duplex, you have to start going up typically a lot. If you look at it as a 2-story building, that fits into any of the residential neighborhoods around here.
yeah.
When you talk a 3-story building, it doesn't.
I don't think the residential height limit is 35 feet, is that correct? So I don't know if you can do a 3-story and 35 feet.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, it's
If
hard.
if you can say that a 50-foot building, the top 35 feet are habitable, and the top is not, that's a 35-foot building.
Well,
Yeah.
You can get 4 floors in 50 feet.
yeah.
There's
Well, we're talking 35 feet and we're talking residential, so.
there's a 3-story house in Pine Meadow Village.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway, so
But
that's the thing, is when you start adding units is where my discomfort comes in.
Okay.
And so if we were to put an MCU on that for now, and then work on it and maybe remove it, I'm comfortable with that.
On triplexes.
On triplexes. I'm not comfortable with the 4-plex.
All right, so.
That's where Gary is.
Yeah, that's where Gary is.
Question,
Sure.
have we ever been challenged on our interpretation of a conditional use?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it's the state that wishes us to be tighter and more succinct, but in reality, developers have not challenged our interpretations?
That's correct, but I know that there have been challenges in other parts of the state.
So we just been lucky.
Could be. Yeah.
There was a pretty recent challenge. I can't remember if it was in which community it was in. If it was in Lake Oswego or Eugene, they love challenging things in Eugene, so it could have been there. And that case went to Luba, and Luba tightened up some of those. I mean, their decision made this requirement pretty clear. So yeah, you guys probably haven't been, but it's just.
We're not changing our conditional use definitions at this time at all, right?
No, and my point is just if you're going to extend them to other housing types, you just want to think about that. That's what I'm trying
We're
to say.
just moving it from duplexes to triplexes. We're not adding another one, right?
Well, I think to me, it makes sense. I mean, if you have a conditional use already now on a duplex, why wouldn't you have it on a triplex? Why wouldn't you have it
It
on a
wasn't a
fourplex?
permitted use at all in the residential zone
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
right?
It was a conditional use before. The idea behind it was just to, not create another obstacle to getting housing built. This is the reason why we went to a permitted use. But
Right, the data we don't have is how
I
many
can-
people have just never even initiated this process because they felt like it was going to be too much of a lift in the permitting process. We won't know that number. So trying to, eliminate hurdles here.
I
And
will.
a fourplex doesn't have to be, 4 units right in a row or something. I mean, there are fourplexes in downtowns that are, like 2 units downstairs, 2 units upstairs. And I think some of them have garages and driveways and some of them don't.
But see, that comes back around to the conditional use standard. That's why you want to be able to review the design.
And I think what
Right.
what Matt is saying and Scott is saying to some degree is, let's take care of those issues in the design and as opposed to in the type of housing we're allowing. Let's make sure that our design means that if it was a fourplex and it was allowed, that the design would be something that people would be comfortable having. But how do we guarantee that?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I know, it's hard.
Yeah, you could tighten up the standards, make it a permitted use and just tighten up the standards to the point you're comfortable with. But, again, the trade-off of going too far is, or is anybody going to do it if it's too expensive?
Well, again, an interesting point, and that is that, removing it on duplex, it's been there. Okay, it's not created any issues. So you remove it, it's permitted use. If you put it on the other 2 or whatever, and it creates an issue, then you've got an issue. Because the thing is, we haven't really gone out and asked the community what they think about this. And I disagree with the answer. I know we've had a lot of these public hearings and stuff. We sent a survey out, but the survey never asked the question. You kind of looked at the survey, it was a lot more generic and higher level. And I understand that because that's where it was done in the process. And even at the design charrette, if you went to design charrette and you asked me, are you in favor of middle housing? I'd say yes. But the design charrette doesn't say you in favor of middle housing in existing residential neighborhoods. So that's the piece we've not asked and determined. That's
Okay.
why I'd like to slow parts of this down.
Yeah, well, one way it could automatically be slowed down is if we agree to move forward with them both as a condition, as a permitted use, you vote no, and it has to come back on the 14th. And that would be one way for you and actually all of us to have those 2 weeks to get back on that issue and vote on it again.
I think that's it's an interesting suggestion. I'm not gonna go door to door and knock on doors and ask this question. I think that's a function for the city because we have multiple neighborhoods that have this designation. I think that's something that needs to go out as part of a survey. And so kicking the can down the road doesn't do any good for me. I think that I'm gonna vote no 2 weeks from now as well. That's the reality of it. Until I have that information. I can do the duplex. If you want to put an MCU on the other 2, I'll hold my nose and vote yes. But not wanting to put an MCU on it because we've heard from the consultant that, well, you really shouldn't do that. Well, we've already got them, and we can remove them later. And that allows this to move forward and to not be in the next meeting and those kinds of things. That's where my brain is.
Okay,
And in a year, we can star this to say, were there proposals that came forward and because it was a conditional use, they said nix? Or did nobody come forward with a proposal because nobody's interested in doing it in the first place?
well, just like we could call it a outright permitted use and go back a year from now and change it, we could do, you know, the minor conditional use. That's staff level, is that correct? Is that a type 2?
Sorry, say the question again?
The minor conditional use, the MCU, that's staff level?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so you don't have to go before planning commission, you don't have to really do, I don't want to say a whole lot, but you have to do some things, but it's minor.
The main thing is it gets a notification, there's a sign put on the lot, that's notification changing.
Okay, so I think in the interest of getting through tonight, I can agree to that. Yes?
Yeah.
Yes?
Okay.
Yes, there we go.
I thank
So-
you all for tolerating me.
No, so
That's-
someone's gonna have to read this off as a change. Is that-
Carrie's writing it for me, I think.
So we're gonna, have to maybe take a break in between the vote, once you're through everything.
Okay,
And make sure we have the words.
okay, great.
Just want to make sure I understand, the proposal now is to keep triplex and quadplex, but make them MCUs?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's what we've just agreed.
And duplexes, nothing.
Permit-
Outright.
Permitted outright,
Yeah.
permitted outright. Okay, great, good discussion. I mean, I think this is good. Let's hit our next thing.
Check,
That was mine.
That was Gary's.
check one,
Okay,
7 more to go.
7 for you, Jennifer?
What's up?
7 different things?
Well, I mean,
Okay, no,
I think that's what I have
You
listed out
can-
here of the,
I think a lot of us
line
have
items.
similar, some of the same, so go ahead.
can we, I was gonna say, let's talk about something we can agree on, but I don't, I don't know.
That was the only thing I had energy for.
Well, let's tackle the building height issue. And that was kind of a two-pronged, if I understand. It was building height in the MFR in conjunction with removing area ratio, floor area ratio.
Right.
Okay. So I am okay with removing the floor area ratio. I'm struggling with the building height. And again, that just goes back to my previous comment on our quilt of zoning areas. And I just feel like there's some areas that wouldn't be appropriate. And I also acknowledge that builders, especially in the, being that this is a multifamily zoned, specific height adjustment. And I'm cognizant of the fact that, if anything of a large scale of an apartment building or condos or something like that, that's going to be a large developer building those, and, the economics are a lot different for a builder like that. And I totally understand being able to maybe do 4 stories of habitable area is more economically viable, and maybe that's why we have never seen 50-foot buildings in town, because that 3rd story was, that
As
4th
high as you can
story.
go. It's just
Yeah,
roof-
and
it's
that
roof
4th,
after that.
that
Yeah.
4th story was maybe where, they could finally turn a profit. I don't know that for sure, but it could be part of the issue. I've never seen a 50-story building. 50-story or 50-foot.
50-story.
I haven't
We
seen
know
either
what
one.
you meant.
Something else.
I know what you meant.
But I'm just really struggling with that, because I think that has been,
But
in my experience in Bend, for instance, I think they made that leap. They made a bigger leap height-wise, and I think it drastically changed neighborhoods when they did that.
can I simplify the question a little bit?
Okay.
Do we want 4-story buildings in town?
In
That-
town, meaning.
Well, there's
Well,
MFR.
Anywhere?
In the,
This is
in
MFR.
the multifamily zone, because that's the only place we're
Right.
considering it. So this is the ultimate question. This is gonna make buildings go from 3-story to 4-story. That's it. That's basically it. So let's, we're talking code language and all this other stuff, but I think we can simplify this question. Do we want to allow 4-story buildings, apartment buildings in town?
Yeah, I was in favor of it until I realized we didn't have any. I was thinking, well, sure, if you got 35, if you built 50 feet, and you got 35, yeah, the extra 3 feet, nobody's in it, that's stupid.
I personally think that I'd rather have 4-story buildings if it's a hotel in downtown core, if that's something that they need to make something viable. But this is not commercial. We're talking about
Right.
residential areas, and a lot of these multifamily zones and are overlays, and they're near other things. So that's kind of the big question.
That area south of downtown, for instance, is all MFR, and that's a very, very residential, single family to plexes neighborhood. And
Yeah, Matt, can we get the multifamily zoning map up there?
It's up there.
It's up there.
It's kind of that, I don't know if they have a laser pointer or not.
well, it's all of the Hayden world and down into the
Oh, I gotcha.
and then down into that proposed Sunset Meadows, bordering East Portal, and then that light salmon below the DC area is all MFR, and then
Village Park and then the fire station and
Did I boy
that little square of blue.
Nancy, are you planning on putting a
linear is
4-story
there.
building on your
Oh,
property?
yeah, thanks, Joe.
I might.
Okay, so really that's the question. When you're talking about building height,
Yeah.
we're talking adding another story max for our multifamily.
The trick to doing it is view shed.
View shed,
It-
the color?
view
View
shed.
shed.
Oh, view
In
shed.
other words, when you drive around town, there's so many places in town where you turn around a corner and right there in front of you are the mountains. And that's one of the things that I think brings people here and that they like. So the trick becomes when you start building taller buildings, that view shed becomes diminished or even goes away. Now, some communities have view corridors that don't allow buildings above a certain height. We don't have that. Some communities have solar corridors, don't allow a building above a certain height. We don't have that. So I think that the problem with making the decision to go taller, and I haven't got a real strong opinion, but the decision to make the building go taller without having given some thought to how we preserve some of the aspects of the community, whether it's a view corridor or a solar corridor, could leave us to make some of those decisions that we were talking about that we don't want to make, that we can't undo. So it's,
Scott, can I get
we're
a-
not California where they have those kinds of things, but the reality is we have to kind of think a little bit about this. How do you say, yeah, it's okay in this MFR, but it's not okay in that MFR because it's going to block a view of the mountains and those kinds of things. I don't know. I guess I could get an apartment on the fourth. I could get an apartment on the 4th floor, and then it wouldn't be an issue.
Jennifer, you had a question?
Just a clarification, this is an outright use, or, I mean, it's kind of a scale thing, because if you're gonna go 4 stories, it's probably gonna be a large, you're not gonna have a 4-story building on a 3,000 square foot lot, hopefully, but,
There's still
is
lot
this-
lot size restrictions for that,
yeah.
per
so is
unit,
this,
density, per.
So would this be a permitted use, or is this,
So you say
Conditional use.
permitted use, are you talking about the height?
yes, the height?
Yeah, it would be basically by right, something that you don't have to request additional approval for,
Okay,
if approved.
because I feel like, again, I don't want to make government more complicated, but,
And
yet, here we are. Yes, exactly.
Well, we're discussing it.
Well, we're
That's
just,
what we're
discussing
doing.
it. My concern is, we're looking at, for instance, an affordable housing project, with our RFP from a couple months ago. And we have the potential there, and I think the developer is aware of this, that if he can go another story, he can add a lot more, or that team can add more housing, affordable housing. Right now, that project is limited by height and, square footage of whatever lot they get, with setbacks and all the other kind of restrictions that they're left to. So, and Another thing in the Sunset Meadows, this first version of their master plan that's come out, they have this.
Should we be discussing Sunset?
Oh, yes,
Meadows?
that's a good question.
I'd advise not to,
I
yeah.
don't even know what it looks like.
I
Okay,
don't either.
I don't either.
okay. What
Okay.
what I read in the nugget. Anyway, I think it's kind of alluding to him there. I think there's some places in town where it would be because of trees and location, setbacks, something like that. A building like this that height wouldn't be that obtrusive, but there are certainly areas where it would, be some sort of monolithic Washington Monument type, just bizarre looking building. And I know there's mention in the report about having step backs in the design standards of, having maybe the third or fourth story stepped back, so you don't just have this 50-foot wall on all sides, but that isn't part of this. It was certainly discussed in the plan, but it's not part of this ask. So I'm struggling with this one because I think that I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to projects, like an affordable housing apartment building that could end up looking really nice and be helpful for a lot of people in our community. So
This was one of my big issues as well. I am having gone around the community, taken my little maps with me, checked out each lot, saying, okay, this is the picture of what could go here. And is this a good idea? Should it be conditional? Should it not? And listening to what people have said, I am kind of the opinion that we should not move forward with density standards at all. Increases in density standards, unless it is tied in some way to guaranteed affordable housing. I do not want to give higher and denser and free will for growth in this community if it's only going to end up being market rate. I think market rate's going to happen anyway. That is what we want to be able to do, is make sure as this community grows that there is an opportunity for height and density and compromise on all these things we're talking about, if it includes a guarantee that that particular property will be 120% of the median income or less. If it's not going to be, then we're already building that all over town as fast as people can build. And that is not affordable, what is being built. I have several people who say, even if I sold the house I'm in, I could not afford to live in what's being built in some of the new areas. And so I don't want to increase any of this density or any of it if it's not going to result in more affordable housing. And just because we build a bunch of apartments and duplexes and fourplexes and intrude in neighborhoods where they may not want it, unless teachers and firefighters and regular folks that work in this community will have a shot at it. Because we're already building as fast as we can for the rich and famous. So why change anything unless we have some guarantees? So I'm not voting on any of this unless it is tied to affordability and I think we can do conditional uses. I understand now that's not in favor, but I'm really concerned that we're going to lose our view corridors and all kinds of things that make this town feel great and we will have given up a lot and we will get nothing. And I'm afraid that's what will happen. So that's where I'm not willing to go 4 stories unless that is absolutely going to be middle affordable housing.
Okay, here we go.
I've been very patient, so I'm going to give you everything that I'm thinking all at one shot, because I think that's the only shot I'm going to get.
Yep.
So change is hard, but you moving here, you moving here, you moving here, you moving here, my moving here, caused change in the community. Just because we're here, we can't stop change and other people from coming in. We've ruined, by our moving here, what other people experienced.
The people before us.
The people before us. And so I have a hard time saying no one else is allowed to move here because we're too full. We might ruin the view. We might have more traffic on the street. And that goes back to disagreeing with the comment Andrea just made. If you have a higher density, if you have more infill, you have a more viable, walkable downtown that mitigates some of the traffic car routes that people are complaining about. Traffic is a key issue for us. It allows, with more market rate housing, the average person to live here and move here. If we don't have any more infill, if we don't have a higher density, it will continue to be the rich and famous, or the people like me who moved here and got a house for $160,000. Very proud of that fact. It's the only way I could live here. But my children cannot afford to live here. My son just took a job in Prineville because he couldn't afford to live in Sisters to work at the Forest Service. This is going to continue on. I know the reasons, if you build it, they will come, and that is true. Your house was built or you built it and you came. It wasn't there before. I adored Sisters when it was 911 people before the septic system came in. I thought it was a great town. It was dying. It was dying. So that planning commission and that city council made that tough decision, and the residents, to build a water treatment septic system, and this is a result. We can't just stop now because we don't like what's happening. We have to have smart growth. We have to have intelligent growth. All of the effort that the consultants and the planning commission and we have put in don't allow us to just stop now this process because we don't like what our options are. You have to make the best choice right now for the next 20 years going forward. Addressing the text amendments, I gotta get the right word here, ordinances, as we go forward and reevaluating them is a smart way to go. You can put checks and balances in place, but just saying, nope, we're not gonna have any growth, to me is appalling. It's not the right thing to do. It's not the fair thing to do for future residents. It's definitely not the fair thing to do for the people who live here now, who moved here and don't think anything else should happen because they created the change that we're dealing with now. And I'm going to use my neighborhood. It is multifamily residential, a block and a half. For whatever reason, 22 years ago, single family residents were allowed to be built there. Every single lot except for one that is vacant right now. That kind of poor planning, that kind of implementation or lack thereof has gotten us to where we are now. If we let that 10 acres of prime multifamily residential be zoned with single family housing, I'm talking right behind the post office, south of it, I don't know the street address. If we allow that to be single family homes, shame on us, because what's going to happen is we will have more Hayden, Mackenzie Meadow, Pine Meadow subdivisions going further out of town where it's not walkable, where there is no sense of vitality, where there is no easy connection to town, and all we're doing is kicking the can down the line, causing the expansion to happen in decent farmland for us, maybe, or more timbered area. So we need to grow up, make the tough decisions, and put this process into play. I think that's probably it for me. Thank you.
Actually, that was very well said.
No, it was
Thank
good.
you.
Um,
Oh, and.
I hate you now, but it was very well said.
And I'm sorry, I am a beaver and I have to go back to those darn ducks yesterday in their presentation. You know, you only see what is in front of you. You have blinders on. You don't see the potential of all these other design elements that we're trying to put into play that mitigate height restrictions and setbacks and design features that can make projects, instead of just this big overwhelming mass, just plunked down on a piece of property, you don't realize the scale that can be, well, you do, that can be designed into it with good design. And that's what we're striving for. And that's what the consultants and the planning department have tried to bring to this whole process at our request. Everything that we've asked and demanded, they've met our needs. And for us to pull back now and say, oh gosh, no, sorry, changed my mind. I don't think we should have, sorry, Gary, a triplex in the downtown area is appalling to me when we agreed to that 6 months ago. Okay, now I'm really done.
Okay. Well, you haven't heard from me yet either. And I gotta say that I'm more like Nancy than more like you guys in a lot of ways, in the sense that.
I don't think
I don't know.
we're at all
I don't know.
even similar.
No, I know. I was on the planning commission for a couple of years, and honestly, it's much, much harder than our job, other than some of the big decisions we make. The details in it are just, talking about doing your homework. I mean, we do our homework and it's still a tenth of what they're doing. But, you know, I like how Nancy put it. I'm the same way. I love this town, and I know I'm blessed to be here. And, you know, I got my house for $219. Thank you, Chris Converse. And I understand it. I probably couldn't. I'm the mayor. I couldn't buy a house, just any old house. I would have to find a bargain somewhere to find something else. But you know, I do design houses and I design things. And we have design standards even for the multifamily buildings that are going in, even if they are 4 stories. There are things we can do to mitigate that. We can set even stricter design standards of saying something like only half of the footprint can be over 35 feet and the other half aren't. And that automatically creates visual interest because you have different levels, you know, so 50-50. I don't know where that puts us for our discussion today. But I do think that what we've gone through is supposed to make the city as inviting for as many as different people as we can, not just single family homes. And so I want a more robust affordable housing program. I do. But I can't tie that to all the people that are coming in. I can't do that because we're not trying to invite just a certain group of people. We're inviting, you know, we want to be inviting to everybody. So I'm really, you know, the height issue, I get it. I kind of don't want 4 stories, but, you know, 20 years from now, we might absolutely need it. You know, people are moving here. I have this conversation with everybody. People are moving here whether we want it to or not. We're going to pack this place in if we don't at least try and accommodate some of that growth through density changes. If we don't do any density changes, the UGB expansion conversation will be so ugly because we would need more acres because some of the people that are coming in still want single family homes. I know we can control some of that. I know we can control some of that situation and that conversation, but this is the first step. And I think that, I don't remember what the numbers are, but I think this gets a good portion of the growth within the city. So when we do have to start talking about a UGB expansion, that we can say, hey, look, we did these things, you know, 44%, I don't know, I'm just throwing a number out there. 44% of those people, we were able to accommodate the growth in the city, but it's now not enough. And now it's time to make even harder choices, which is making the city bigger. So I'm not sold on the height limit, but for the most part, I'm sold on 95% of these changes to the text. That's kind of where I'm at.
The house limit to me is an interesting one because I'm not sure. First of all, I asked Scott earlier today, do we require an elevator in a 4-story building? And you were going to research it, but you weren't sure.
Yeah.
You might not have had a chance.
Is that an ADA requirement? Did that
But
come in at some point?
Well,
I guess where I'm going with this is, when we think about increasing building height, we also have to think about the people that are living and their ability to get in and out of that building. And, 3 stories is bad enough, 4 is even worse. And so if we allow that type of development to occur without having some requirements like elevators and things like that, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot, that same thing down the road. And did
Well,
you
then
find out the answer to the
If
question?
people have trouble with that, they don't have to live, we're not making them live on the 4th story of a 4-story building.
Sometimes it may be
It's
your only
America,
choice.
they don't have to.
But it may be your only choice. Right back around to the whole discussion again. And people move in and they age. People may be very fine going to the 4th floor, and then they get 15 years on their knees and they aren't. So then they're forced to move or relocate, which is not what we're looking for. We're looking for people to come here and live and communicate, be a part of the community. And we don't want to be a turnkey community.
The RFP for the affordable housing had a elevator built in for the 3 floors that they were looking at, didn't it?
Yeah.
So it might automatically kick in, where they were just very conscientious.
But there are 3-story apartment buildings behind Ray's that don't,
Yeah, they're
that
not,
don't
yeah.
have, so, I mean, it's a valid question, yes.
I mean, I was curious.
It's also a very American question.
Well, I
that
know.
We don't want to go upstairs.
Well, no, I think that's, again, as a person whose knees have given out stairs are hard for me. At the 3rd flight of stairs, I have to stop because of the medications I take, my legs burn. Now, yeah, I could live on the 1st floor or the 2nd floor, yep. But what if that's not available? And so I just, these are all things to me, when we start talking about increasing building height, we have to be ready to address. As far as the 50 feet goes, do I want it? No, but we already allow it.
The look of it.
And if we already allow it, then change it to allow habitation in the top 35 feet.
In the top 15 feet.
50, yeah, they say, thanks.
Yeah. No, math.
A lot of
15 feet
A lot of numbers.
is the only thing it's probably going to do is force the builder to make a flat roof building, because there's not a lot of room in that. And that, to me, is an issue. You're the designer, you know that, when we talk about trying to create some visual interest and stuff, and also snow load on a flat roof building is never a good thing, even though we don't get a ton of it, but once in a while we do. So that's the one thing I see, is that they're going to tend to be more slab-like because there's no ability to camp the roof or anything like that, I don't think. You would know more than me.
Right, well, then we just raise it to 60 feet with only 50 feet livable. I'm just playing a little devil's advocate.
Yeah, I'm not.
That's why I kind of boiled the question down to, do we want 3 stories or 4 stories?
Yeah.
Part of this issue, I think, came up because we know we had this discussion around the DC zoned area, because it was hard for anybody to build within those height restrictions when the bottom floor had to be commercial, and commercial usually has to have higher ceiling heights. So it really ruined their ability to go higher. But if these are purely residential buildings, it kind of changes the math a little bit.
4 9-foot ceilings, it's 36 plus a foot thick floor of 3 of them, that's 40 feet.
Yep.
And then you have room for.
And you could make penthouses in the complex,
but-
Well, is there a way to make this conditional use? I mean, it seems like that would be the obvious route. Again, not trying to make things more complicated, but it just seems like something that's going to be that sizable. It might be nice to have more community input or more review from the planning department, at least.
So it usually with a building, it'll have to go through a site plan review anyway. So there already is a notice to the neighbors. There's posting of the property,
Design review.
design review. So,
Because it's an MFR? Or
what's that?
because it's in MFR or because it's,
Because it's a structure, a new structure. All new structures have to go through site plan review.
yeah.
It'll have a
But you
density
don't have
review.
to,
I'm sorry?
It'll have a density review.
Yeah.
but you don't have, I mean, not all new structures, you don't have to notify the neighbors if you're building a single family.
Anytime you do it through a site plan review, you do. Other than like a building, like a single family that's just getting a building permit, you don't
yeah.
need to, or a duplex. But if it's a multifamily building that's gonna go tall, then they would have to go through site plan review. So there is that notification already to the neighbors.
But notification doesn't mean they can do anything about it. It just means.
It would have, yeah,
it's
they'd have to
happened.
cite some standard that it
Well,
didn't meet.
do you want your neighbor telling you what to do? I mean, I'm just, again, I'm playing a little devil's advocate. I mean,
I certainly don't want my neighbor to.
you know, some of us have really.
I lock my door when I see my neighbor.
Well, I just think that I've taken a huge amount of heat from the Woodlands.
Yeah.
Because I told people they're really sincere about building workforce housing. That's something we've been looking forward to, is that property coming available and being developed. And no, we are losing some trees, we are losing open space, but it's in a good location. It's walkable to town. It's where people can live and then work here. And I just really endorsed it. And now I'm getting hammered because it did not turn out to be what was anticipated.
Okay.
And that's my fear,
Okay.
is that we will allow a lot of this and it will not turn out. Just because we build it, it doesn't mean that it will still maintain that workforce housing.
Before the Woodlands, Mackenzie Meadows was what we got beat up on.
Yep.
Before Mackenzie Meadows, what we got beat up on was Cold
Pine Meadow
Springs
Village.
and Pine Meadow Village. And before that was the Pines. And, you know, a lot of people didn't want Buck Run back in the day.
Yep.
So I think we
Saddlestone.
got beat, and Saddlestone for sure, but I think we get beat up on everything. So there's some part of us that has to go, well, we know we're gonna get beat up. We know it, because change is hard.
Well, and I want to circle back to Andrea's comment about the affordability, and I told her earlier too, I really struggled with this going through here because there isn't a lot of stuff in what we're looking at tonight that really directly helps attract more affordable housing. We're certainly removing some hurdles or trying to. But I had to remind myself that this is just a chunk of the recommendations in that plan. There were a lot of financial options brought into that plan. And I think, Scott and I had a conversation today. I mean, we talked about 3 others just off the top of our heads that weren't even in the plan that could be very viable solutions to
Make it more affordable.
to make more affordable, to either raise money one way or to partner or, so I kind of had to keep circling back to that when I was looking at this because I wasn't seeing the stuff I think you're desperately looking for, and I appreciate that, but I just had to remind myself that, that's on us to keep this moving, this train moving, and, in a few months, maybe saying, okay, here's phase 2, and maybe these are the financial incentives. That's our major responsibility, but that's how I kind of am addressing what we're doing tonight, tabling that a little bit with the promise of digging into it hopefully very soon.
And I'm gonna play devil's advocate again. A 4th story on a building makes it more affordable, whether we like 4 stories or not.
I mean,
So I'd like to try and boil this down a little bit because we kind of brought up the height thing. And this is one thing I know we're all struggling with because again, I'm not hugely sold on seeing 4-story buildings in town, but at the same time, we've been recommended to pass this as it is. And it's been through this long process.
I would endorse the fourth story if it were conditioned on it being 120% AMI or less.
The whole
That
building or
be-
the
that
whole
that-
building or one story of it or one quarter of it, I guess it would be fair.
Well,
to say.
no,
It's
so
usually
it should be, some of it should be 80 and some should be 120.
Because
But
I
it
think there are definitions that we're also talking about tonight,
But
are like 30%,
I don't think we can
right?
guarantee that. I think what we can guarantee is that we hope that partners would come along on some of these properties and take our incentives and make them affordable.
Well, that's
But
why I want to leave it as an incentive, that you can do market rate if you want to do 3 floors. But if you want to do 4 floors, then you have to agree to have a certain percentage of the building be 120% or less. That be part of the incentive bonus.
I mean, it's hard to argue against that. I have to say.
I had the same thought, actually.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue against that. I mean, that's sort of the incentive, and
Is that something we have to
Is it already,
write down and, go ahead.
is it already spelled out in the incentives and we're just not seeing it written that way? Because we.
You get bonus units.
Yeah.
But, and
not tied to
extra
height.
density, but there's nothing
About height.
height right now, yeah.
But isn't that implied with the density?
Is it what?
Isn't that implied with the density?
Well, the assumption was that we were going to be, the proposal is to go to 50, so, you would get, more units and have the extra height to go with it.
You could do market rate 4 floors.
You could.
if we approve this.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
and if the idea that was proposed of market rate 3, affordable 4, how does that change what's in front of us if that's something this group decides to do? I'm asking the gentleman with the striped shirt, or that plaid, I guess it's plaid. This time
Gingham.
Gingham, okay.
We'd probably have to go back and take a look at that, how to restructure that if it's just a matter of changing the building height and noting it that a certain percentage of the units have to be affordable to get the extra height or what. I don't think it's something, unless Matt has a good, quick idea that something we could just do on the fly here.
I would hesitate to try to craft that language on the fly. We could bring something back to you. I mean, I think we could do that, but this is not that's not necessarily a simple provision. It sounds simple, but I think to actually write it in a way that it would make sense, I think we'd want to bring something back to you and not try to write the language tonight. You could direct us to do generally what you described and bring something back, and we could do that.
Is this something you've seen before in other?
Yeah. I mean, so we've already got 2 essentially density bonus type provisions in the code as written in what we've brought to you. One allows for additional density if units are affordable. So that's the sort of going from 40 to 50. The other is within the density bonus provisions of the code that allows for additional units if, again, a certain number of them are affordable to households in different income ranges. What we're talking about now is sort of a height bonus provision. And yeah, I've seen height bonus provisions in other codes. I think, so again, we could come back to you with something like that. But I would hesitate to try to write that language or write it in my head and speak it to you tonight. I
We have
think
a meeting on the 14th, and we understand that if we decide to do something like that, we would probably want to do it right and not try to do it on the fly and get something wrong. So I guess what we would have to do here is at least give them some guidelines of what that sounds like. Are you talking about if you get the height bonus, how many of the units in that building are you going to require to be affordable housing? All of them? Half of them? one floor of them? I don't know.
Well, the density bonus already outlines, or has an outline for that, right? Isn't it something like 30% or some?
You get like, depending on which category, you're doing, you get, like if you go lower on the income
Oh, okay.
guidelines, you get a higher bonus.
So should we just mirror it kind of and use the percentages or whatever?
It might make sense to do that. However, if one of our goals, aside from the other incentives that are in here that look fine to me, is to really push the 120 ADM or lower, that may be where we want to have specific language that says the building may be able to go to 4 feet if it is, the entire building is devoted to 120 ADM or lower. Now, that allows a developer to make money, and the 120 ADM or lower is probably going to take care of some of our folks in town that are living in the woods or having to commute from Prineville or somewhere like that. So we've kind of solved 2 issues. And then you can apply the regular density bonus to the others, because when we're looking at, we already know what happens when we do the real low ones.
Okay,
Is that we don't get to say who lives there.
okay, so explain it concisely without all the extra stuff. I mean, really,
Well,
what are we
maybe-
saying? I want to
maybe-
hear it.
What AMI were you looking at?
120, I think, was what Andrea had mentioned.
120 to 80?
120 or lower.
Yeah, if they want to do some at a lower, that would be fine.
That would be
but
all the units in the
We
building.
wouldn't require it. Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we all know what we're agreeing on.
That's just
Nancy.
sounding ugly.
Nancy's thinking.
I built one 120 unit and the rest are, no.
I mean, I think we have a little time to craft the language between now and the meeting when we meet with, regular meetings with Joe and Carrie. So
Do we
can,
really have to pick the percentage of that? I think maybe just the idea that the density bonus could apply to a 4th floor may be what we need to talk about tonight, and then go from what does that mean?
yeah. Okay. Are we okay with that?
I am. Do you need a break, anybody? And are we using single person AMI? We're using a family of 2.4. What do we?
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're not going to answer that tonight, right?
AMI is usually considered the whole family, is it not?
It depends on how many people, like, it's lower if it's just a single person. If it's a family of 6,
Yeah.
it's much higher. So,
I think you.
Kind of depends on what the unit sizes are. And what they
Yeah,
can accommodate.
1 bedrooms are going to be for single people,
Right.
2 would be
Units
for
based on unit
family
size.
or whatever, so.
And I that's kind of in the weed stuff for my head. I'm kind of floating around in circles, but I do like the idea that the bonus of adding the 3rd floor is to create affordability.
The 4th floor.
Yeah.
The 4th floor.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as
Above 35 feet is what we're talking about.
The nosebleed seats.
As opposed to somebody coming in and buying a piece of land that has a great view and putting in a 4-story condo building and selling $1.2 million condominium units, that are, 4,000 square feet each with a great
Yeah,
view.
I might hit the lottery, so,
Yeah,
the odds
There
are
will
bad.
be room for you.
Okay.
There will always
Yeah.
be room for the rich and famous.
So we're good with the height issue then, sounds like.
So I just didn't hear what was the guidelines for the percentage of, is there a percentage of units?
120 or below,
No, I know that's
Oh.
that's the AMI, but
the whole building.
the whole building? Oh,
I don't think you guys agreed on a percentage.
Well, go ahead, Matt.
What I heard was come back to you with that we're not going to agree on that percentage. That's
Not
too
tonight.
much detail for tonight.
No,
The
it's not.
goal is that some portion of the units need to be affordable to get the 4-story. And I think that's why I hesitate to draft the language tonight.
I know, I was just trying to give him guideline for what you guys got to come back.
well, I heard somewhere between the whole building and something less than that. So
No, we were
we've got
talking
quite
the
a
whole building.
disparity here.
I could go either way. As long as.
You make it the whole building, you will not that will not happen. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So I really think
Come up with a recommendation and we'll look at it.
Yeah,
that's what I suggest.
Okay, great.
defer to
you, Matt.
expertise.
We don't want to make language that doesn't work, right? You good?
I already tried that.
I'm not good.
Not good.
No. I'm not good about this whole process, but I will come on
We're going to
board.
soldier on?
We're going to
Okay,
soldier on.
so we got the height done.
So I am still very interested, I think, in the actual density, where right now we have 15 to 20 or 30 per acre. And we're talking about allowing outright, doubling that acreage, and then only allowing a bonus if it's more than that. So I looked at the examples and I went, we're allowing outright a doubling of it. And I think the pictures that I have seen and driving by, it is already crammed as tight as I would like it to be. And doubling it is without any review, I'm not in favor of. The examples that I saw and that I see around town, I go, no, I would not want that across the street from me. The way it is now is marginally okay. Doubling it would be a problem.
Is it because it's poor design now and you can't envision a better product? Because there's lots of fabulous products out there. I don't know if Matt's even still there, but the Northwest Crossing, the senior living, that is high density.
Yeah, my stepfather lived there.
Yeah, that's high
And
density, and that's a nice looking fit in Northwest contemporary
It
style.
stuck out like a sore thumb. The only reason it fits in is because they built big buildings around it. It stuck out like.
That's where my dermatologist is, so I could actually attest to that, but
Yeah.
it's a beautiful area.
But it was a new area, and you knew that it was going to build high around it, so you could accept it. It was a beautiful building, but a little tiny senior housing. It wasn't family housing in any way. It had no yard, no outdoor space, no.
Had a huge park.
Not for years, it didn't have a park next to it. But I mean, it was okay for what it was. It was a beautiful place. It was great for what it was, but it stuck out like a sore thumb. If we were going to expand our UGB and do a master plan, I would say, oh, okay, let's master plan this with all the buildings being of a certain height. But you can't take a building like that building and plop it down in some of the spots that we have available now, and it not just look like, whoa, what's that doing here? I think the apartments that we have now, for the newer ones behind Ray's and whatever, are okay because they back up to a commercial area or they back up to the forest. And so I don't see that there's too many areas where that it would create a problem but I think if I was the neighbor that lived behind the other side of that, if it was single family housing instead of Ray's, I don't think that the people would have been very happy with that. And that's only 3 stories. So I'm concerned about outright density increases doubling without reviewing what that's going to look like, where it's going to go, and if it's appropriate for where it is. Those conditional use standards that you're talking about, I think you could take the same project and put it a number of different places in town, and it would be appropriate in some, but not all. And so how can we just allow it outright without knowing where it's going to go? I just don't see that doesn't change the whole dynamic of our community.
So you want a
Well,
master plan community?
Yeah.
Is what I hear you saying.
No, I think it should be a conditional use, and that it should be that the staff looks at it and uses the criteria that's in the conditional use to see whether it's appropriate for that particular one. There's a little manufactured home in the old area that is right next down to a 2-story home, and I thought, I feel so sorry for them that was allowed to be built right next to them, but it's allowed. So
I have
there's nothing we can do about it.
Okay, I have a question, Scott. We have one apartment that is on Adams
Yep.
where the laundromat is. What's the density of that one? Isn't it like 39?
Oh, you talk about First Street?
30 units per acre, yeah, on the First Street apartments.
Yeah.
They don't stick out like a sore thumb to me.
Oh, yes, they do.
No, I agree with you. They don't, the design is not
The
fabulous.
design is not fabulous.
It's a little dated, I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
so.
And where is their
Two-story building.
yards?
Well, it has,
Yards,
it's a big
it's
courtyard.
apartments.
And it's
A big parking lot.
yes, but it's also in town and it's.
They
1
walk
block
everywhere.
From First
First
Street
Street
Park,
Park.
it's, 3 blocks from Village.
It
Green.
was unintentionally more dense than we made when code was updated at some point in the early 2000s or whatever the last time.
What's the density
But anyway.
of the one that backs up to Artworks, the newer
Backs up to what?
Artworks?
Cowboy Court,
That's called Cowboy Court? Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
want the density?
I think it's under
Don't
current
know.
rules,
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like it's on the current rules.
but anyway, so.
And I
But
think
and
that's okay.
I hear both sides of this. I've been in communities where there are relatively attractive, high-density buildings. And I've been in communities where they are but ugly. And so the question becomes, how does, that comes down to the design standards. And right now, I think our design standards, I've seen the pictures and stuff, and I understand all that. But the reality is, how do can we in our design standards put examples of what is acceptable with actual photographs, as opposed to line drawings that could be interpreted in 101 different ways? And I don't know, and maybe Michael can draw us some, but anyway, I think that's kind of the things of what you want to see. If we put a large building in town, it should fit into town.
I must be looking.
And
at
I
the
don't think
wrong
putting
one,
a-
'cause when I
a little,
walked in there, it was just.
sort of a false on the front is going to do it. But there are some in there that look very nice.
So I will say, we looked at your design standards for multifamily buildings. I've looked at a lot of cities' design standards for multifamily buildings. You guys have a good base set of design standards for multifamily buildings.
But in terms
Could
of,
you improve them or add to them? Absolutely. You could say more about certain aspects of the design, but you have a pretty good set of multifamily design standards. And so that's what I would say about that. They're not lacking in most ways, in my opinion, but you could improve them. You can always improve them. But I think you'd want to have a larger conversation about exactly how you did that. But it's not like you don't have design standards for multifamily buildings. You do, and I would consider them a pretty robust set of design standards.
Pretty robust.
excellent, that's good news. I mean, that's the thing, and I think it's unfair for us to judge what we're talking about by the building on First Street, which was built a long time ago and is very monosyllabic.
Maybe, yeah. But again, it's serving its purpose well.
Oh, I don't disagree. And you look at the apartment complex that's on the other side of Clemens Park, that's an attractive set of buildings.
It's in kind of a semi-commercial area, however. If you plunk that down in some other areas, they might not be too happy to have that.
Yeah.
But like you said, the design standards would be different, so it would look different.
Well, and one issue with First Street Park is because of its downtown location, it's able to sponge off of the ample parking available
Yep.
in the downtown core, where if you put this building in another part of town that didn't have all that on-street parking, it would be a totally different situation. It would be kind of a hot mess, so it is kind of site-specific. Can be.
So again, we're only talking about multi-family residential zones. So we're not talking next to,
We're really only talking about a handful of sites that could even
like 3 of them,
kind of
right?
accommodate something of any size. Because I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of it in the multifamily zone to the south of downtown. There's just not enough big lots there.
By the post office is the one area.
Post office, you could consider the project that we won't talk about tonight that will be creating potentially some multifamily
Baltimore.
site.
Part of it.
Yes,
right?
and then the Woodland site has some some multifamily
And
And
paths.
because they're not in design yet,
They're not in
or,
design yet.
And there's-
this will affect them whatever we decide, right?
And there's a pretty
Yeah.
good sized piece of property across from Les Schwab, just in the MF.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah.
Well, that would be hopefully our next topic is, yeah, there will be a lot in that downtown, that overlay zone, if we pass that.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I just, with our parking, initially we came forward with some parking reductions. It's going to be pretty challenging, if not impossible, to hit the high end of those densities because of the parking requirements. That's going to be a major limiting factor in really achieving the high end. So, talking with Matt and some other design professionals around here that, it's totally, we went through that conversation and we kind of made I think, a good community decision where maybe the community's not ready for reducing parking requirements yet, but that's a huge factor in terms of whether or not you can achieve these densities or not. We elected as a community not to go forward with that right now. So something to factor in.
Yeah, and lastly, again, we're gonna, if we pass these new densities, I'm sorry, 15 buildings aren't gonna spring up tomorrow. They're just not. It's gonna take a while. So, we have to, I understand your concern because I have the same concerns. I have concerns about density too. But again, in the greater scope of things, this is just the one part of the whole comprehensive plan. So,
Right, the parks plan is a big part of this, because open space is an issue that's been brought up to me, and I've also had a concern too of, density is okay as long as there's places with elbow room, and unfortunately, this is a housing plan, so it's not a parks plan or open space plan, so,
We're working on that.
yeah.
yeah, I'm supportive of the densities. Obviously, I wish we didn't have to do it, but I think we kind of have to.
Okay, so, yeah, specifically, when we just say overall densities, there's also the topic of the lot size reductions in residential.
Yep.
If we want to move on, I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
No, that's,
take the reins, but we're kind of
we're
segueing into this
not
topic.
going to finish this tonight, but we do have to go through the points of
Yeah.
contention so we can at least get something written that we can vote on next time. So, and again, even then, we might not have
I try to assuage myself with the thought that you're putting out there that even if we implemented this as is, there is very few places where something that I'm thinking the worst case scenario.
Right.
And the likelihood of the worst case scenario is not high. And so I shouldn't just let it overwhelm me. But I just want to make sure that if we go through this whole process and all this time and effort, that we end up somehow making the community a better place for all income levels. And I just don't see where we have any guarantees that what we're doing is going to achieve that. So that just really, to have gone through all this and taken everybody's time and effort and then not see that happen is going to be very disconcerting.
Well, that's where some of the housing strategies, come into play that we can employ later. Will help to create the affordability, because you're right, just by, increasing the density does not guarantee that it's going to be more affordable. They could do really high-end units and you're right, but it at least creates the conditions, more favorable conditions for more affordability than we have currently. If you allow for more multifamily, in general, multifamily is more economical than single family. Duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes create those opportunities. Doesn't mean they're going to be affordable to somebody making 80% of their median income, but it might hit some of our workforce. Those folks that are getting caught in between, making too much to afford affordable housing,
But they can't buy
and not enough to afford market rate housing. So, and we need housing. Our housing needs analysis says we need housing of all stripes. So,
And And the last thing I'll say is, nobody here, up here, and I don't think anybody who works for the city wants to abandon the idea of affordable housing or slow it down. In fact, I think we all realize that one of the ways that we make affordable housing is having the city partner with other people and make it happen. And that's on us. It's gonna be on us. It's gonna be on me and Gary for 4 years, you guys for 2 years, and Susan for a couple of years. And when she gets here, and, you know, we're not stopping it. We're gonna,
Nancy will be drinking Mai Tais somewhere.
I think she's bringing her last board meeting, she'd carry one out the door.
she's dreaming of long, far away
We
places.
could also just, you know, on another note, just relate the experience that we've seen on the statewide level after adoption of the House Bill 2001. Matt did a great presentation at our planning conference that we went to, and it was called House Bill 2001, Slow Start Stampede or Slow Start. And Matt can relay it in more detail than I could, but the conclusion is that it's been a slow start. Just because these rules were put into place doesn't mean that the light bulb or light switch has been turned on and has caused this flood of change in the community. It's going to be something pretty small, and probably change will occur over a long period of time.
Which means we could shift gears if we have to, again. I mean, whether it's a little back or, you know, whatever. I mean, there are people around here, obviously, there are people in town that want no growth, zip. I can't accommodate them, only because it's not realistic. But there's also people that want everything on the table, and, you know, I don't think we can accommodate them either. So we gotta do some of the stuff. That's it. We have to do some of this, for sure.
And Andrea, I want you to know that I'm exactly where you are, but I'm not sure that the things that we're talking about are going to get us there, even if we really, really go after it. I think it's gonna take a lot of careful thought and planning and partners at the table. But I'm with you 100%. I don't want another, I want to say Woodlands fiasco. Those homes are going to be market rate, and that's fine. We'll have a lot of people come in at market rate. I'll be real blunt. At some point in time, and Nancy won't have to deal with this, so she'll be happy. I want to have a real frank conversation about short-term rentals. I think if we're going to talk about housing plans, we're going to talk about doing the things we're doing, we're going to talk about density, we're going to talk about building height. We need to be ready to address the fact that a significant number of homes in this town are either second homes or short-term rentals, and some of those are in that market range where they would be 120% ADM affordability.
That's it.
So we're going to have to address it at some point. A lot of other communities like ours, and our tourist communities, have had to do the same. So I'm not giving up on it, but this may only be one step in the toolbox.
Take that part of it and think about our goals for next year.
Right.
Yep, for sure.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Oh, no.
But it doesn't get us through.
But I think it's to try to help create a sense of there's many tools in the toolbox that we haven't addressed yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all had talks about short-term rentals, so,
Yes.
okay. So we don't agree on density 100%. No, I know. You know me, I'm trying to, you know, I'm good with these meetings as well. I'm kind of good. Tonight feels a little bit different, but hitting a benchmark on density. Are we gonna just kind of keep it the way it is and see how it goes and have a discussion on the 14th again? Or what do you think? I mean,
Well, I think we ought to discuss it out tonight.
Density in the multifamily zone, is this what we're talking about right now? Because these all relate to some degree of density.
okay, I'll tell you where I'm
I-
at. I think I'm okay with the density, and I'm definitely okay with the lot sizes, because those have been vetted out by our consultants that know way more about it than I do, and I know a lot about it. When I just talked about my property of being 10,000 square feet, but I couldn't put a quad on there because it's shaped differently. I think that a lot of the lots in town, not all of them, we have a lot of lots that are old lots that are nice and rectangular. But I think naturally stuff just doesn't work. And I think that there are other factors that we're not thinking of. Some of it's the lot size, some of it's the setbacks, some of it's the zone. You know, I'm pretty sure that these lot size changes are not They're not super extreme. I think that they're well thought out. They're medium-sized changes. They're not huge changes. Does that make sense?
I agree.
I agree.
And I'm okay with going forward with those sizes. I mean, I just think that, again, I don't think stuff's gonna pop up out of nowhere. We might get one or two that we're going, oh, God, we wish we'd able to do something about it, but we can't, there's no way, there's just no chance that we're gonna agree on every building that's put up in town.
Well, Scott and I realized today that there are a few blocks in town that are platted lots, old plat, smaller than
Or minimum.
What's even?
the new minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There are some
so-
small ones out there, but, okay, anyway, I'm just telling you where I'm at with it.
You had 3 or 4 heads nodding with you.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the lot sizes.
Okay. What else is on your list there? You
No,
had like
the-
7 things.
Well, the downtown overlay zone, the DC zoning, where we can put overlays, they're suggesting in some areas that they can just build residential only instead of having to be mixed use. I'm for that.
So you're talking the southeast parcel right there off, well,
Matt, could you,
There was
do you have the
3 different-
ability to go to that slide? by
3 different
chance?
parcels.
Yeah, I can share that. Give me a sec.
post office. Yeah, really, more coffee?
Don't want to name names.
Thank you, Matt, for hanging with us.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry you missed Jeopardy there, buddy.
It's costing us double now, right?
He's probably starving. Look at
The
him.
US isn't playing soccer and you can ruin it for everybody.
There we go. Almost there. It's a long slideshow, so.
It's okay.
Oh, we've got all night.
Don't say that.
That's not true.
My longest meeting.
I would like to say
This is the map we're talking about. So basically, the 3 outlined areas in yellow are where we're proposing to allow for residential only developments.
There's actually 4 other, huh?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. That
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, there's 4. I always forget about the one in the bottom right corner there. Yeah, the 4.
One in the Northwest is already kind of allowed to do that.
Yeah, the one that's sort of, west of Fur and straddles Adams, you can already do it to some degree.
Including the Hoyt piece that actually has frontage on Adams. I didn't realize that until we took a closer look.
Yeah, so there it's, with this, so there it's really already allowed. So the new areas where it would be allowed would be the other 3. But we're just circling all the areas, so.
Now, if we would like to get our hands on that property across from the elementary school, maybe we should zone that something. No, I'm just kidding. I'm tired. I'm getting silly.
So,
I think the market rate on that is probably.
you talk about rezoning it to public facility.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and they tend to keep ownership, so unless they change their minds,
Yeah.
it's kind of a moot point.
That's true.
So again, proposal here is to allow for purely residential developments in this area. You could still do mixed use developments. Doesn't change. No other elements of the code would change. So height would be the same. Density would be the same. Setbacks, everything else would be the same.
And just to be clear, that's all downtown commercial already.
Yes, correct.
Want to make sure. So you can do mixed use or you can do residential only.
That would be.
I know the people in Pine Meadow Village aren't going to be super happy about that, but at the same time,
Yeah, and right now you could do mixed use and you could have the same basically size and intensity of development. You just have a commercial.
You might like it more if it develops out just as residential.
Yeah. True. Okay.
So, like the impacts would not really be any significantly different than what you could do now.
All right. Thank you for putting that up there. Jennifer said she's okay with it. I'm okay with it. So, okay. So that's not even an issue.
Yay.
No, non-issue.
Look at us go.
Amazing. You good?
Looking.
Because we started with Gary and we're only at you. I'm just kidding.
Zoning incentives for affordable housing was kind of, I mean, that was, so that's kind of getting blended in with the.
With that, we're adding the
height
height for it.
requirement,
We're
okay.
adding the height thing, which, honestly, I think that's a pretty, it's a good thing. And if we, later on, we can check it again. And if someone says, hey, I want to make a market rate thing, and here's the reasons it's good, and we have some 4 stories that are affordable housing and they look great and nobody's having super big issues with them, we can change it later and say, just make it an outright height use. We can change that again. Okay, go ahead. Pretty good.
And then the density and the MFR, we never really, I mean, again, that kind of blends into the heights issue, but also was separate. I think we touched on it, but we didn't finish that conversation.
But we did with Gary.
Pardon?
Did we address that with the triplex and fourplex MCU?
Well, no, this is
She's
density
talking
in
MFR.
MFR, going from the
Sorry.
7.
No, it's okay. Yes, we
unit-
did.
7 unit minimum to the 15 unit minimum.
It's 715 to 15 to 30, right?
Well, it's 7 to 15 currently, up to 20 with the conditional use. We're proposing to go 15 to 30 by right, 30 to 40 conditional use, 40 to 50, got to do the affordable housing. That's how it's written right now. And then the minimum density, one of the big reasons we're raising the floor of the density is because we want to preserve our multifamily from being developed out as single family.
Right.
Right now, between 7 and 15, you can do single family and meet that density requirement with really small lots. So if you bump it up to 15, that's going to make it a lot harder for people to do single family projects in our multifamily zone.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah.
Okay, at the lower than 15 standard, you could possibly build single family
Single
homes.
family in FFR.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to avoid, right?
Right.
Well,
But oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, to me, that one struck me as strange, and, as it is, I was always under the impression that if it's MFR, it's MFR, and we shouldn't be allowing, well, no matter what the lot size is, single-family residential construction in the MFR zone.
Unless it's a cottage development, which is a
Cottage
standard, which is a standard.
Right, but that's still multifamily in my mind. I think so, maybe the fix to this is just, and I got the goal, and I agreed with it totally. But are we trying to engineer a fix when maybe a simple fix is that single family is not allowed in MFR? Boom.
Part of it, but you're also trying to make sure that you're using that land efficiently and allowing for somebody to come in and build on MFR land at 7 units per acre is not an efficient use of that land. So, you could do both, but I really think personally, you need to bump up the floor on the density. That's one of the first things that the state's going to look at when they say, hey, have you looked at ways to use your land more efficiently? If you haven't done something along the lines of minimum density in that MFR zone, I think that's an issue. So yeah, you could also prohibit single family detached new homes in that zone. But I do think this is an important one from my perspective, from a planning perspective, to bump up that minimum density in the MFR zone so that the land's used for what it's intended for, frankly.
The hitch is, and Scott and I discussed this today, is that whole MFR area south of downtown, which is a lot of small lots and a lot of single family homes and duplexes. My understanding with my conversation with Scott was that if somebody owns a lot in that neighborhood, which is an older neighborhood with lots of single family or duplexes, they could still build a single family home. They're not held to that, okay, I have to do the math and I own 0.3 acres and therefore I have to I'm stuck building 4 units or I can't build anything.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. And that's in and of itself not a bad thing. You're not trying to force somebody with a very small lot to build a bunch of units on it. So, I mean, I think that's okay, but it doesn't, I'm going to use one of my favorite phrases. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You're not going to get it perfect tonight. I think do some things that are reasonable. Don't worry about every single potential outcome or every single problem that could come along because you won't adopt anything. if that's kind of what the standard you're trying to hit. I think it's okay if you end up with some lots in that area that take a long time to get developed at multifamily. That's just what they are, so that's all right, but you do want to across the zone, particularly for future larger developments, make sure the land's being used efficiently. It may not mean every parcel in that zone gets used efficiently, and that's okay.
And here's the other thing, in a multifamily zone, if somebody's doing something that's kind of planned, you can have some smaller single-family homes that are nice and affordable, and then also have, some apartments, and together the density still fits in the 15 to 30. It gives them, because if we banned outright single-family homes in a multifamily area, then you're stuck with
Right, yeah,
apartments.
I hadn't realized that
Yeah,
we had
so-
those small lots up there. That makes sense.
I mean, that's Hayden Homes, right? That's multifamily out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
There you go. Anyway, to the old standard, of course, Hayden Homes, Mackenzie Meadows is the old standard. It'd be a little more dense if it's under the new standard, so that's okay.
It could be.
Could be.
more dense.
Well, it's gotta fit in with the
Well,
density standards.
So
So if we raise
you're
up the
saying Mackenzie Meadows would have to be twice as dense?
on a big project like that, but it would be planned, and so,
They could average out the density. They could still do some single family, but the overall density for that site would have to meet that kind of
Be a
minimum
lot more
15.
Apartments than there is.
and those and then duplex.
Well, their apartments that they have now are pretty small apartments, so yeah, it could mean couple bigger sets of apartments in that complex, so that would probably get them over the 15-unit threshold, and then they would still they'd still probably have quite a few single-family lots.
But again, that has a master plan is a whole big review process where everybody can see what's going on, so.
Yep.
Okay. So, okay. Anything else?
Well, I defer to Scott. Did we hit all the?
Yeah, I think you did.
Points.
Yeah, I'm kind of keeping track of kind of them, and thank you for kind of,
I'm gonna go to everybody again, Gary. So here's where we're at, as far as I can tell, is the MCUs on tris and quads. Density, we're not changing at this point. We're not actually changing any numbers. And then we have the height exception tied to affordable housing, and they're gonna come back with some language for us to review. It would be nice if it was done somewhere halfway between this and the next meeting, so we could review it one at a time. Is that possible?
So if you're looking to continue the text amendments with the updates and have more conversation at the next meeting, and pass the ordinance or vote at least on the ordinance, I need that ordinance in my hands complete by next Wednesday, because it will be a brand new posting. So you do run into some time restrictions pretty quickly.
Get busy.
Is that doable, Matt?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so I meet on Tuesdays.
Depends on how many changes we make.
I mean, I've heard you describe the changes that you want us to come back with so far. So unless you have more, I'm saying we can do that.
That's where I was gonna say, that's what we have now. That's all we have. Are there other things you guys wanted to discuss? You're good. I think I'm good.
I'm good.
I wanted to throw out an idea that doesn't have to be considered, but something to put in the back of your head just for a little later. A maybe future, not now, but maybe a future requirement in like a larger multifamily building, at a certain threshold, maybe 20 units or higher, that they have to provide a space in the facility that is, can legally be used for a daycare. Behind housing, daycare in Central Oregon is an enormous problem, and one of the top issues is finding a legal space that meets fire requirements to even house a daycare. And if we're gonna have a lot of people in one space, dense, I feel like we need to provide at least one service for the people, large amount of people in that one space.
Okay.
Places already offer things like gyms or pools or other amenities, so this isn't a huge ask for any developer, but
It's a huge ask.
It's a big one,
That's a
but,
huge ask.
well,
but,
it doesn't have to be one that services 100 kids. It could be one that can hold, 7 kids or something, but it's just, that is that is such a dire need in Central Oregon and Sisters, and we're making zero progress on it. And this is one way that would be fabulous, especially for, anybody that is living, in more dense housing like that, to have an on-site ability for daycare is a huge economical and logistical benefit
We,
for our workforce.
will you, yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. It was something,
No, I don't disagree with you.
but
It's not a change that's gonna happen in this thing.
no.
But goal setting's
Yeah.
coming up. I love it. I love these diverse ideas. I think childcare is definitely something that we should have for goal setting next year. I don't know what capacity it'll be, whether it's
Yeah.
in some of the new code or if there's other ways to provide partnerships somehow with other people. But we'll talk about that another time, so thanks for bringing that up. So,
Otherwise,
no-
I'm good.
Good. Okay, we're not gonna pass this tonight. But, do you guys have?
Let me talk to Scott for just a second about what we need to do here.
Yeah,
Want to go to-
Yeah.
I think this process has been a very interesting insight into, while Oregon has strong ethics laws, for a reason. Here's the downside, this would have been a great time for the 5 of us to get together and hash this out a few days ago, and, and we would have been able to come here and with, not waste a lot of people's time. But this
People
is
would
our.
not have understood
Right.
how we came to the decision we came to
Right.
if they hadn't been able to hear
I was
what
pretty
the
sure,
bones of contention
I
were.
was pretty sure that it was gonna go something like this
Yes.
tonight.
I was
And,
too.
and, and
So,
this,
and I'm okay with that.
and this was
I'm fine.
with all of us reading the material, which was a lot, and, making time to talk to one-on-one, making time to talk to staff. We put in a lot of hours already, and this is still how far we've been able to get. So it's just pointing out for the general public of the magic of the sticky process.
It may look ugly, but it's necessary.
Yeah.
That's democracy.
This is making the sausage.
The worst thing you
Yes.
can do is try to do this in an hour.
Yes.
We're making the sausage tonight, that's okay.
Yep.
Super sexy democracy.
I'm gonna give Carrie the floor and let us know what she,
So I'm actually going to hand the floor to Scott because we have to make a decision about what you'd like to do with this hearing.
uh-huh,
If you wanna close the public hearing.
yeah.
If you wanna keep it open, allow it to be open back up. Allow written, testimony to continue to be submitted, and then take, testimony at the next meeting based on the changes we get forward. Or if you got a comment, you wanna close it, just go to deliberations next time. Your options.
I think,
Can't hear him. His mic is off.
Oh, your mic died. Sorry.
thank you for that. Who said that? Thank you.
I'll wait till he gets a functioning microphone.
We have mic fatigue.
We had a battery die on the mic. We're replacing it. Scott's gonna repeat what he said.
1, 2?
Okay,
No, we're on.
so if you're gonna continue, you just need to decide if you're gonna just, you've closed the public hearing, you're gonna keep it closed and just go straight to deliberations next time? Or do you wanna keep it open for written and oral testimony, again?
Well, I guess it's a procedural question. If we go straight to deliberations next time, and we're gonna have new language to look at. And should that new language not be open and not be discussed in the open? And if we go straight to deliberations and that language is dropped into our lap and no one else's lap, I'm not sure how that works. So I want to make sure we're being clear and upfront with the public and we're doing this the right way. So I'll defer to the experts, you guys, as to what to do. But I'm okay with either, but I want to be sure we do it right.
I think you have the option to do it either way. If you want to err on the side of caution, you could leave the option open for people to be able to comment on any new changes that are made by staff.
I
Because
hate to put more time on staff, but I think that that's the way to go.
It's not a whole lot more time.
That's how I feel.
That's how I feel too.
Again, even though we're changing 2 things, we're getting language we haven't seen before from Matt and you, and so, although we have to still declare 7 days in advance for the ordinance, the text can be tweaked if we have to
Just one other kind of.
without a public hearing. Go
One
ahead.
possible option, I think, would be that you could close verbal or oral testimony tonight and leave the record open for written testimony. You know,
That sounds good.
another option.
Okay. So I need a motion to close the verbal testimony and leave the written testimony open? Is that correct?
So do we need to get the dates that we're coming forward with it as well?
Yeah.
So,
Continue to a date.
so you're going to continue the hearing to December 14th, 6:30 meeting, and close the oral testimony and
leave the written record open.
Written record open.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we close the hearing until December the 14th, 6:30 PM, but
Excuse me, can you repeat that? Continue the hearing.
yes, my mistake is that.
That's
way
okay.
Tonight.
Start again.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we continue the hearing to December the 14th at 6:30 PM, that we close oral testimony but leave the record open for written testimony.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are we good? Okay.
Thank you very much
Thanks,
for your time
Scott.
and your.
Thanks, Matt.
And your.
Sorry, Paul.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Oh, no, the
I'm
meeting's
not sure why
over.
we should send you home.
We don't
Sit
have,
down.
we're not doing the ordinance because obviously we didn't get the text amendments. I can't find my script
Here
anymore.
you go, it's other business.
Oh, we're at other business staff comments. Paul. No,
No.
you can't sit there and say there's nothing.
You could have gone home if there was nothing.
No, I think you guys have been doing the work. You need to go home.
Yeah,
So
we're gonna
I'll
go
just-
home, don't worry.
I'll give you 2 quick updates that we're taking couple projects to PWAP on the 13th. One would be hopefully a revised concept, preferred concept for the East Portal Mobility Hub. And then we'll be taking the Barclay Drive corridor improvements to them as well. So
PWAB.
Public Works Advisory
Public Works
Committee.
Advisory Board.
That's we're all tired, PWAB.
And then just a heads up, there's a pretty radical proposed change for the Locust Barclay intersection. So anybody coming into town from Camp Polk will stop.
That makes sense.
That's good.
Yep.
That's a
The
good.
through movement will be the alternate route.
That's always struck me as the way it should be if we're gonna do it. So.
Yep.
I don't think it's that radical, to be honest with you.
And then we're
It will be
still
if you live in Camp Polk.
Yeah.
wanting to plow some snow. So do your snow dance.
Yeah, cool. Good job on the snow in the past. Anybody questions? Okay. Good
Thank you
night.
for sticking around.
Thank you, Paul. Scott, come back up. Unless you don't want to do nothing.
Have we slapped him around enough?
I'm sorry, I didn't have any other real staff comments to
That's okay.
share.
Do
I'm
we
sure
have
you're.
any updates from our code enforcement?
Yes, if you're referring to 252 South Elm,
We all know
We
it by
didn't
heart.
actually say it, but since you said it, what's going on?
okay, well, he was cited, the property owner was cited several months back. They contested it. The judge was going to make a site visit to make his own determination. That took a little while. Jacob Smith, our code enforcement officer, took some photos. The judge said later that he just wanted photos of the site. And so we took photos of the site and we circled things that tried to discern between which one is a code violation and which is just stuff that's can be normally considered to be in your backyard. And so we submitted that to the judge quite a while back, and it finally did come back just, I think, today with a letter saying that he agreed that it was a violation. And so the property owner has been cited, has till December 6th, I think, to clean it up or could face further fines. So, yeah. it took a while, but yeah, there's been some movement on that, and hopefully we'll see some progress out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further questions? All right. Joe? Hey, welcome to the conversation.
Yeah, I know. I had my voice all ready to go for the ordinance. I had it memorized, actually. So I'll
That would have been impressive.
maybe I'll do that next time. No, I don't have too much. Just kind of getting caught up on things today. We made our annual debt service payment, $360,000. Yep, that's kind of our big one. So luckily, we've got plenty of resources for that.
In the budget.
It's in the budget. Oh, yeah, dollar for dollar. The LGIP interest rate continues to go up. It's at 2.85% now, which is good. And yeah, we're just kind of chugging along with all things finance, kind of moving forward with some of the cloud work that we've been talking about in terms of our accounting system and things of that nature. So business as usual.
No audit talk, man. I'm kind of.
I've been going back and forth with them a little bit, just trickling in. Yeah, I don't set their pace, unfortunately. So whenever they ask questions or need information, I spit it back to them immediately, and that's the best that I can do. So yeah, that I'm guessing that they won't have that presentation till after the new year if it's going at the same pace. So it'll be fun. We're looking back at 21, 22, working in 22, 23, and then looking ahead to 23, 24 at the same time. That's always fun.
Okay. All right. It's up to us. Gary.
Oh, Carrie.
Oh, Carrie, I'm so sorry.
Got a few things.
Carrie's got carpal tunnel.
Oh, man.
Good job today.
New.
I'm
Made
sorry.
it to the finish line.
Oh, this must be Nancy's because there is no name on it.
No, thank you.
Uh,
I feel a theme this week. I'm not on emails and I don't have a name.
This is Nancy, sorry, Nancy's name is on.
Oh.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, I feel validated.
Yes, you feel seen.
You heard about that?
I got the wrong
Well,
one.
whatever name, is it?
by default.
Andrea,
Oh.
It's convenient, huh?
Jennifer.
And then no name, Gary.
Thank you.
Maybe yours. Oh,
Goodness
there you are.
gracious.
It's there. So we actually went out for all of our boards and are giving everybody these this year. And you guys as well, though your names are on the bottom of them. So if you leave them here, I can get them back to you because I figure you're more likely. So thank you for all the work you do. This is a small.
Should we open these now?
You can.
I
I'm gonna
am.
Talk just a little
Well,
and real fast. Exec session next Tuesday at 5:30. I think you guys have all accepted that. Another fun meeting. That'll be easy. Board recruitment interviews start tomorrow for PC and go on Monday with the rest of the groups. So I'm going to see a lot of you guys. And we are turning over the DMO, the building to the DMO tomorrow. So that's all.
Woo!
Okay.
So we can go visit.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
You won't have a key. Well, but I mean, aren't there gonna be people there? We could, oh,
Not till probably early January.
oh, okay. Oh,
Nice
thank
color.
you.
Thank you very
city
much.
color.
Thank you very.
That's
Thank you.
Very
Sisters Blue.
Sisters Blue.
Is there a name for that, or did I just make it up?
Executive session
Yeah,
at 5:30.
that's just, that
Sisters
just-
Blue.
that just happened.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You didn't get one because
Okay. Counselor comments. Gary, do you want to go first?
Yeah, only thing of note is the Parks Master Plan is in its final throes. We reviewed it the other day. Goes to the Park Advisory Board next week, the 7th, and Planning Commission after that. And there was some discussion about some changes and opportunity. We'll look at probably adopting that sometimes, I'm thinking, in mid-January. Is that what you're thinking right now?
no, it'll be February because it's got to
February?
go to
Yeah.
PC and then to ordinance. So.
Yeah, there was just a lot of other things going on, and we pushed that out somewhat.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
Yep.
Jennifer?
Not much. I did see, we're getting the emails about the small cities LOC meeting coming up next week. Or no, in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks on a Friday, the 16th. there's a good chance that I will be not available to go to that. I went to one, 3 or 4 months ago, and I thought it was a good use of time. This one's gonna be in Culver. It's a lunch, it's over lunchtime, so if anybody wants to go, it would be.
On the
nice.
16th?
Yeah, it's
Was
Friday.
it canceled today? I read an email that I thought that was the one that was canceled.
Oh, well, maybe
We can
you
definitely.
can double check. I
You're
can't go.
you're gonna be here on the 14th, so we do have another meeting between now and then, and we'll figure out what's
Yeah.
gonna happen with that. We'll double check if that's actually happening.
It got rescheduled for the 16th. It came out today. It just came out. It was canceled because it was conflicting with something else.
So it is on the
It is on the
16th.
16th.
I got you. Thank you. Okay, so we'll figure it out at the next meeting.
Okay,
Just remind us.
right, I just wanted to kind of.
Well, we might be able to figure it out before then,
I
but
might be
let's
able
not
to
figure it out
couldn't do
now.
it before because of jury duty, but I don't.
Andrew's ready to get out of here, so
Yeah.
she's all packed up and everything.
Don't have anything.
You don't have anything?
I've nothing except for Paper Place tomorrow. What time is that? Grand opening?
8 or 8:30, it's on my phone.
8:30. Okay,
Good Lord.
I will be there. Okay, is that it?
that's it?
Okay. What I have is been a little controversial. There's been some emails to the city back and forth about Creekside Campground. I think we've all seen them. We're aware of them. There's some people have been suggesting that we're considering safe parking at Creekside Campground. As far as I know, we're not. Is there anybody that has a different opinion about that? If not,
I've seen no request.
okay. So that's not really going on. We're doing a lot about homelessness. We're building affordable housing that we can hopefully get some people transitioning through. We added a position at the county to get more help for our people in the forest, 20 hours a week when they used to get 2 hours a month. There's been suggestions that we're not doing enough or not doing anything. Some people have said we're not doing anything.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I know that Carrie talks about it daily with people. I know Joe talks about it often with people as the interim city manager. I'm always talking about it. We meet all the time. We meet weekly, and we meet with the cold weather shelter. We're meeting with people. Andrea's doing a killer job at the, what's it called? What's it called?
It's very long.
Yeah, no.
The county.
I call it Charo.
Yeah, the county homeless
Coordinated
coalition.
homeless.
Yeah. So anybody suggesting that we're not doing anything it's ridiculous. There are some people who are from other cities or jurisdictions that think, they'd like to, put their stamp on what Sisters is doing. I frankly won't allow that. We're going to do what we need to do. And I think we're doing a very good job. Can we do more? Maybe, but it's a tough job. It's not something that's going to be solved overnight. And that's all there is to it. So thank you very much. And let's go home.